What is reality is one of the deepest questions we can ask, and when taken seriously, it can begin to unfold the very nature of truth. At its core, reality is everything that exists, not just the stuff we can sense, but all the forces, objects, and laws that make up the universe. When we talk about reality, we're really talking about what's actually there, whether we understand it or not. Now, there's a difference between reality itself and how we perceive it. Our brains take in signals from the outside world, light, sound, texture, and build an internal picture. That picture feels real to us, but it's only a version of what's out there. A dog hears higher frequencies than we can. A bee sees ultraviolet. Their realities are shaped by their senses, just like ours. This means our experience of the world is filtered through biology. It's not made up, but it's not the full picture either. You can see this with visual illusions. In the Muller-Lyer illusion, two lines of equal length look completely different because of the arrow shapes at the ends. Your brain adds meaning that isn't really there. That's perception bending reality. On top of that, we layer beliefs, memories, and expectations. If you're walking alone at night and hear footsteps behind you, your mind fills in the blanks fast. The fear, the assumptions, they affect how real that moment feels. So even though reality itself stays constant, the way we experience it can shift based on what's happening inside us. Scientists try to measure reality using tools that remove human bias. But even then, theories change. Newton's laws worked, until Einstein came along with relativity. So our understanding keeps evolving. Reality doesn't change, but our grasp of it does. Why is there something rather than nothing? Out of all the big questions, this one is the hardest to answer. When we say something, we mean everything. Matter, energy, space, time, galaxies, planets, thoughts, people, everything that exists. And nothing isn't just empty space. It's the absence of space, no atoms, no time, not even a vacuum, just nothing at all. The strange part is, we don't know why there's something. In fact, there's no obvious reason the universe had to exist. From a logical standpoint, nothing seems easier. It doesn't need rules, energy, or structure. It just isn't. Some scientists and philosophers think the universe might have come from a quantum fluctuation, a tiny blip in a vacuum that created particles, which then exploded into the universe we see. But even then, you have to ask, where did that vacuum come from? Why were the laws of physics already there? Others argue that nothingness might be unstable, that given enough time, something had to happen. Still, that idea assumes time already existed, and that's part of the problem. The moment you imagine a process or a cause, you're already inside of something. There's also a view that maybe nothing was never an option. That reality, in some form, had to exist. Not because of a reason, but because existence is the default. It's not very satisfying, but it might be the best we can do. In the end, this question isn't just about the universe. It cuts deeper than science can measure. It shows how little we really understand about why anything exists at all. Even the tools we use to ask the question, logic, language, thought, are part of the something we're trying to explain. Did the universe have a beginning? At some point, everything we see, galaxies, stars, planets, had to come from somewhere. So the big question is, did the universe have a beginning? The most widely accepted answer in science is yes. According to the Big Bang Theory, the universe started about 13.8 billion years ago from an extremely hot, dense point. Then it expanded. Fast. Over time, matter cooled, atoms formed, and the building blocks of everything came into existence. But here's where it gets tricky. The Big Bang isn't an explosion in space, it's an expansion of space, space itself stretched out. Before that, there was no space, no time, no before in the way we normally think about it. Still, not everyone agrees that this was the absolute beginning. Some physicists suggest the Big Bang may have just been the start of our observable universe, not the start of everything. There are models where the universe cycles through expansions and contractions. Others suggest there could be multiple universes, each with its own beginning. And then there's the quantum view. Some theories propose that the universe could have emerged from a quantum vacuum, a sort of mathematical nothing that isn't actually nothing. It's unstable, full of energy, and governed by rules we're only beginning to understand. Even with all this, there's no clear answer. We can observe what happened shortly after the Big Bang, but the exact moment, or whether there was a true starting point, is still a mystery. The deeper we dig, the more the line blurs between physics and philosophy. What we call the beginning might just be where our tools stop working. Was the universe meant to exist? The universe exists. That much is obvious. But was it meant to? This question isn't just about how the universe began. It's about whether its existence had a purpose, a goal, or some kind of direction behind it. In simple terms, we're asking if the universe was intended to be here, or if it just happened without any deeper reason. One reason people think it might have been meant to exist is because of how precise everything is. The laws of physics, the strength of gravity, the mass of particles, tiny changes to any of these, and the universe might not support stars, planets, or life. This idea is called the fine-tuning argument. It makes it seem like the universe was set up just right for things to work. Some take this as a sign that the universe was designed. Others suggest a different explanation. Maybe there are countless other universes, each with different rules. In that case, we just happen to live in the one where the conditions allow for life. This is known as the multiverse idea. It removes the need for intention because in a large enough set of possibilities, some outcomes are bound to look perfect. There's also the scientific view that the universe doesn't need to be meant at all. It could have arisen through natural processes, guided by random fluctuations and physical laws that don't require a deeper purpose. In this view, asking what it was meant for might be like asking what a cloud is meant to do. It's just what happens when conditions are right. Ultimately, whether the universe was meant to exist depends on how you define meaning. And science can tell us how things work, but it doesn't always answer why they are the way they are. What existed before existence? It sounds like a contradiction, but it's a real question in physics and philosophy. What existed before existence? When we talk about existence, we usually mean the universe, the space, time, matter, and energy that everything we know is made of. So asking what came before it seems natural. But here's the catch. Time itself is part of the universe. That means before might not even make sense in this context. According to the Big Bang theory, the universe began as an incredibly dense, hot point that expanded rapidly. That expansion didn't happen in space, it created space. And it didn't happen in time, it created time. So if time didn't exist yet, then before the universe is a bit like asking what's north of the North Pole. It's a question that breaks down because the reference point doesn't exist. Still, scientists and philosophers have tried to model what might lie beyond that boundary. Some suggest the universe could have emerged from a quantum vacuum, not empty space, but a kind of fluctuating energy field with strange properties. It's not something in the traditional sense, but it's not quite nothing either. Others propose that our universe is one bubble in a much larger multiverse. In that view, other universes might have come before ours or alongside it, with different rules and timelines. Then there are cyclic models, where the universe expands and contracts over and over, with each cycle creating a new version of space and time. So while we don't know exactly what, if anything, existed before existence, it's not an empty question. It pushes the limits of what we mean by beginning and whether anything can exist without space or time to contain it. Is anything truly real? Imagine waking up from a dream so vivid it felt completely real, only to realize none of it ever happened. Now stretch that doubt further. How can we be sure we're not dreaming right now? This is the heart of one of philosophy's oldest problems. It's not just about whether what we see is accurate. It's about whether anything at all exists the way we think it does. For example, if you're experiencing a moment, hearing sounds, feeling your body, seeing the world, those could all be fabrications. You could be a brain in a lab, fed electrical signals. You could be part of a simulation. You could even be imagining it all, with no external world whatsoever. Skeptical arguments like these don't claim that nothing exists. They challenge our ability to prove that anything does. It's not enough to point to a chair and say, there it is. A detailed dream can show you the same chair. A hallucination can feel just as real. So how do you tell the difference? Some thinkers have tried to find an anchor, something that must be real, even if everything else is fake. Others suggest that reality doesn't need to be proven. If it works, if it functions, that's enough. Still, the question lingers. We move through life assuming solidity, but we're never fully immune to the idea that everything we know could be part of one long illusion, no matter how convincing it feels. Is there a God? The question of whether there's a God is one of the oldest and most debated topics in human history. At its core, the idea of God usually refers to a higher power, something beyond the universe that created it, governs it, or gives it meaning. Some people imagine this power as personal and involved, while others think of it as abstract, like a force or principle that holds everything together. Different cultures have developed different answers. In monotheistic religions like Christianity, Islam, and Judaism, God is a single, all-knowing, all-powerful being. In others, like Hinduism, there are many gods, each representing different aspects of reality. And in some traditions, like certain forms of Buddhism, there's no personal God at all, just natural laws or spiritual truths. Philosophers and scientists have approached the question in different ways. Some argue that the complexity of the universe points to a designer, just like a watch suggests a watchmaker. This is called the design argument. Others counter that complexity can come from simple rules over time, like evolution or gravity. Then there's the problem of evidence. Some say you can't prove or disprove God scientifically, because the idea isn't testable. Others argue that if something has no measurable effect on the world, it might not be meaningful to include in our explanations. There are also emotional and psychological reasons behind belief. Many people find comfort, purpose, or community in faith. Others find meaning in secular ways, through nature, relationships, or personal growth. So when people ask if there's a God, they're not just looking for a yes or no. They're asking about the structure of reality, the source of meaning, and whether life is guided by something beyond what we can see or measure. It's not just a question about belief. It's a question about how we understand the world itself. Can something come from nothing? If you leave an empty box alone, you don't expect something to suddenly pop into it. So the idea that something could come from nothing feels wrong. But in physics, it's not that simple. To understand this, we need to define what nothing actually means. In everyday language, nothing means the absence of anything at all. No matter, no energy, no space, no time. But in science, especially in quantum mechanics, nothing isn't always truly empty. Even what we call a vacuum can have energy and activity. In quantum physics, particles can appear and disappear seemingly out of nowhere. These are called virtual particles, and they pop in and out of existence for fractions of a second. It doesn't violate the rules because they don't last long enough to be measured in a traditional way, but they do have effects. In fact, some experiments have confirmed that empty space isn't truly empty. It can still influence things. Some physicists suggest that the entire universe could have started as a quantum fluctuation, where a tiny burst of energy formed spontaneously. This idea doesn't mean something came from absolute nothing. It came from a strange kind of quantum nothing, which still operates under certain laws. Other theories say that the total energy of the universe might balance out to zero. In that case, it's possible that something could emerge without breaking any rules, because there's no net gain in energy. The deeper challenge is defining what nothing really is. If there are laws, fluctuations, or structures involved, is it still nothing? The question crosses from physics into philosophy, because it depends on what we mean by existence in the first place. So while science offers some models where something can emerge from a kind of nothing, it all depends on how we define that starting point. What does it mean to exist? A chair exists, so does gravity, so do thoughts. But each of these exists in a different way, which makes the question more complicated than it sounds. What does it actually mean to exist? At the most basic level, to exist means to be part of reality in some form. But that form can vary. A rock exists physically. It takes up space and has mass. Gravity exists too, but not as an object. It's a force, something we measure through its effects. Then there are things like numbers, which many agree are real in a sense, but they don't physically exist anywhere. You can't trip over the number 3. This leads to the idea that there might be different categories of existence. Physical existence covers objects and energy, things that are part of the natural world. Conceptual existence covers ideas, like justice or mathematics. These aren't made of atoms, but they're still part of how we understand the world. Some philosophers argue that to exist is to have an effect. If something influences other things, directly or indirectly, it counts as real. For example, a fictional character isn't physically real, but the story can shape behavior, emotions, or culture. So in that way, it exists socially or psychologically. Then there's the question of perception. Some things seem to exist only when observed, like in quantum mechanics, where particles behave differently when measured. That's led to debates about whether observation is part of what defines existence or just how we interact with it. So, existence isn't a single idea. It stretches across the physical, the abstract, the subjective, and the theoretical. And how we define it depends on what kind of thing we're talking about, and how it fits into the bigger picture of reality. What is life? We know it when we see it. A cat, a tree, a person, even a tiny bacterium. But defining what life actually is turns out to be harder than it sounds. At the simplest level, life is what separates living things from non-living things. Scientists often use a checklist to define it. Living organisms grow, reproduce, respond to their environment, use energy, and maintain some kind of internal stability, like body temperature or pH. Even single-celled organisms like bacteria do all of that. One key part of life is that it's made of cells. Every known living thing is either a single cell or a collection of them. Inside those cells, complex chemical reactions take place, turning food into energy, copying DNA, repairing damage. These reactions are highly organized and self-regulated, which is very different from something like fire, which also consumes fuel and spreads, but doesn't organize or repair itself. Another important feature is evolution. Life changes over generations. Through natural selection, tiny genetic differences get passed on, allowing species to adapt over time. That process explains the incredible variety of life forms on Earth, from insects to elephants. But even with all these traits, the definition has some grey areas. Viruses, for example, don't have cells and can't reproduce on their own. They need a host. Some scientists say that makes them not truly alive, while others argue they're just a different kind of life. As science looks for life beyond Earth, the definition gets even more important. If we found something that uses chemistry to grow and adapt, but doesn't look like anything on Earth, would we call it alive? So while we can describe what life does, what it is remains partly open. It's a combination of biology, chemistry, and structure working together in a way nothing else does. What is consciousness? Consciousness is what makes an experience feel like something. It's the difference between being awake and aware versus being completely unconscious, like in deep sleep or under anesthesia. In basic terms, consciousness is your ability to notice the world around you and reflect on what's happening inside your own mind. You don't just react to things, you experience them. You see colors, feel emotions, think thoughts, and recognize that you're thinking them. That internal awareness is what separates conscious minds from machines, or even many living things. Scientists often break it down into two parts. The first is wakefulness, being alert and able to respond. The second is awareness, not just reacting, but having a sense of yourself and your surroundings. For example, a person in a coma might have some brain activity, but without awareness, they're not considered conscious. The real puzzle comes when we try to figure out how consciousness works. The brain is made of cells and electrical signals, but somehow, out of all that biology, a feeling of experience emerges. This is often called the hard problem of consciousness, explaining how physical matter gives rise to something so personal and subjective. Some researchers think it's all about information. When the brain processes lots of data in a connected, organized way, consciousness might emerge as a side effect. Others focus on specific brain regions that light up when people report being aware. There are also more radical ideas that consciousness might be a fundamental part of the universe, not just a byproduct of brains. So while we can study consciousness by watching behavior, brain scans, or even through artificial intelligence, the exact nature of it is still one of the biggest open questions in science and philosophy. We know we have it, we just don't fully understand what it is. Where does the mind begin? We know the mind exists because we use it every day to think, feel, remember, and decide. But where does it actually begin? Most people assume the mind lives entirely in the brain. And it's true, the brain is central. It processes information, stores memories, and coordinates emotions. Damage to certain areas can affect speech, personality, or even self-awareness. So there's no doubt that the brain plays a key role in producing what we call the mind. But the relationship isn't always that simple. The mind isn't just a list of brain parts. It's the full system of thoughts, feelings, and awareness that emerges from the brain's activity. You can think of it like software running on hardware. The neurons and chemicals are the hardware, but the mind is what it feels like when all that activity is happening. Some scientists argue that the mind isn't locked inside the skull. They see it as an extended system, spread across the brain, body, and environment. For example, when you write down a note to remember something later, that external object becomes part of how your mind functions. Or when your heart rate affects your anxiety level, the body is clearly involved in mental states. In this view, the mind doesn't start or stop at the edge of the brain. Even everyday experiences support this idea. Your posture can change your mood. Your surroundings can influence your focus. These are physical factors shaping mental processes, suggesting that the mind might begin wherever information starts getting processed. Not just in the brain, but possibly through the body and even through the tools you use. So while the brain is the control center, the boundary of the mind may be wider than we think, starting in the brain, but extending into the systems that help us think, act, and feel. What is the self? We use the word self all the time. Yourself, myself, sense of self. But what exactly is it? The self is the idea of who you are, not just your name or your job, but the deeper sense that there's a you behind your thoughts, feelings, and decisions. It's what gives you a sense of identity across time, even as you grow, change, and learn new things. In basic terms, the self includes things like your body, your memories, your personality, and your relationships. But it's more than just a list of parts. It's how all those elements come together to form a single point of view. A stable sense of me that continues day after day. Psychologists often describe the self as having two aspects. The first is the experiencing self, the part of you that feels emotions, sees colors, hears sounds. It's your moment-to-moment awareness. The second is the narrative self, the story you tell about your life, including your past, your goals, and your role in the world. Neuroscience shows that this sense of self depends on a network of brain functions, especially areas linked to memory, attention, and body awareness. Damage to these regions can disrupt a person's sense of who they are, suggesting that the self isn't a single thing, but a collection of processes working together. Philosophers have pointed out that there may not be a fixed self at all, just a constantly shifting pattern of thoughts and sensations. From this view, the self is more like a stream than a solid object, always moving but still recognizable. So while we talk about the self like it's a stable, single thing, it's actually built from layers of biology, memory, and experience, all working together to create the feeling of being someone. Do we have a soul? The idea of a soul has been around for thousands of years. It's the belief that there's something inside us, beyond the body and brain, that makes us who we are. In most religious and spiritual traditions, the soul is seen as the core of a person. It's the part that feels, thinks, and lives on after death. Some believe it's immortal. Others think it moves on to another life. But in all cases, the soul is treated as something separate from the physical body. Science, on the other hand, looks at things differently. Modern neuroscience sees thoughts, memories, and emotions as the result of brain activity. Damage certain areas of the brain and parts of a person's personality or memory can disappear. That suggests what we call the self might be tightly tied to physical systems, not something separate floating inside us. Still, the idea of the soul hasn't gone away. Some argue that consciousness, the fact that we experience anything at all, can't be fully explained by biology. They believe there must be something non-physical behind it. Others say that what we think of as a soul could just be the result of complex brain functions, culture, and a desire for meaning. There's also a middle ground. Some see the soul as a metaphor, It doesn't have to be a literal, invisible entity. Instead, it could represent the essence of a person, their values, character, or inner life. In that view, the soul is real, but not in a supernatural sense. So whether the soul is a separate thing, a biological illusion, or a symbolic idea, it's one of the oldest attempts to understand what makes a person more than just a body, and why we feel like there's something deeper inside us. Is identity permanent or fluid? You don't think or act exactly the way you did 5 years ago, but you also don't feel like a completely different person. That tension leads to a big question. Is identity something fixed, or does it constantly shift? Identity is the set of traits, beliefs, and roles that make you feel like you. It includes your name, background, personality, memories, and even how others see you. At first glance, some parts seem stable. You might carry the same values over time, recognize your own face in the mirror, and recall a consistent life story. These give the impression that identity is permanent. But in practice, identity changes. People grow up, learn new things, change careers, shift beliefs, or develop in ways they never expected. Someone quiet as a teenager might become outgoing later in life. A person raised in one culture might adopt elements of another. These changes don't erase identity, they reshape it. Psychologists see identity as both stable and flexible. There are core features, like temperament or early experiences, that often stick with us. But many parts are fluid, built from habits, environment, and relationships. Social identity, for example, how we relate to groups like family, nationality, or profession, can shift depending on context and life stage. Even memory plays a role. Our brains are selective, and we often reshape past events to fit our present sense of self. This creates the feeling of a continuous identity, even if the details shift over time. So instead of asking whether identity is permanent or fluid, many researchers now see it as both. It's a moving pattern with some steady parts. Identity isn't a fixed label. It's more like a personal framework that adapts as your experiences unfold. Our thoughts are our own. You think a thought, and it feels like it came from you. But where did it really start? Most of the time, we treat our thoughts as personal, our opinions, our memories, our ideas. But if you break it down, the picture gets more complex. Thoughts don't just appear out of nowhere. They're shaped by your environment, your culture, your upbringing, and even your biology. For example, language influences how we think. The words you know shape the concepts you can express. Someone raised speaking one language may frame the same idea differently than someone raised in another. That doesn't mean thoughts aren't real. It just shows how deeply they're tied to context. Then there's memory. Many of your current thoughts are built from things you've seen, heard, or experienced in the past. If you suddenly recall a song or a phrase, it might feel spontaneous, but it likely came from a past moment your brain stored away. Even your beliefs often start with something you were taught long before you chose it for yourself. Biology also plays a part. Hormones, brain chemistry, and even sleep can influence what kind of thoughts show up. That's why you might think more clearly when you're rested, or feel anxious thoughts rise during stress. The brain responds to conditions, and thoughts follow. So while thoughts happen inside your mind, they're not always fully under your control. They're triggered, shaped, and filtered by factors you didn't choose. You can still evaluate them, challenge them, and change how you respond, but their raw material often comes from outside you. In that sense, thoughts are yours, but they're built from a world much larger than you. They feel personal, but they're also part of a constant exchange between your brain and everything it interacts with. Who are we when no one is watching? When no one's around and there's nothing to prove, something interesting happens. We act a little differently. This idea explores the difference between the version of ourselves that others see and the one that shows up when we're alone. In public, most people adjust their behavior. We follow social rules, respond to expectations, and play certain roles like student, parent, manager, or friend. That's not fake. It's just part of how humans live in groups. We adapt to fit the situation. But when we're alone, that pressure disappears. There's no one to impress, no feedback to manage. What you choose to do in those moments, how you spend your time, how you talk to yourself, what you value when no one's looking, can give clues to a different side of identity. Psychologists call this the difference between the public self and the private self. The public self is shaped by outside perception. The private self is shaped by internal experience. Neither is more real, but they can look very different. For example, someone might act confident in a meeting, but feel deeply unsure when alone. Or someone quiet in public might express strong opinions in a journal. Interestingly, being alone doesn't always mean being authentic. People still follow internalized rules. You might clean your house even if no one's visiting, not because it matters to anyone else, but because it matters to your idea of yourself. There's also a concept in philosophy that the self is relational, that we only exist as individuals because we relate to others. In that view, who you are when alone isn't separate from society. It's shaped by it, even in silence. So when no one's watching, what shows up isn't necessarily a truer version of you. It's just a different one, built from the same materials in a quieter setting. Can the self exist without memory? Memory is how we link together the moments of our lives. It tells us who we are, where we've been, and what we've done. But if memory disappears, does the self go with it? Most of what we think of as identity depends on memory. You remember your name, your past decisions, the people you know, and the things you've learned. These form the story of your life, and that story gives your sense of self a shape. People with memory loss, like in severe cases of amnesia or Alzheimer's disease, offer a window into this question. When long-term memories fade, individuals often struggle to describe who they are or how they relate to others. In extreme cases, even basic facts about themselves, like where they live or what they enjoy, can vanish. Without those reference points, the continuity of identity can start to break down. But even without memory, some things remain. A person might still show familiar reactions, emotional patterns, or preferences. They may not remember loving a particular song, but they'll still respond emotionally when they hear it. This suggests that parts of the self are deeper than conscious recall. There's also procedural memory, skills and habits that remain intact even when personal memory is lost. Someone might not remember learning to play piano, but can still sit down and play. These abilities are part of who they are, even without the story attached. So memory isn't the only part of the self, but it's a major one. It connects the past to the present, giving structure to identity over time. Without it, the self may still exist in fragments, through feelings, instincts, or behavior, but the sense of a continuous unified me becomes much harder to hold on to. Are you the same person you were yesterday? You look in the mirror and see the same face. You remember what you did yesterday. But underneath it all, are you actually the same person? At first glance, it seems obvious. Your name hasn't changed. Your memories are still there. You have a consistent story of who you are. But from a scientific and philosophical point of view, personal identity is more complicated than it seems. Biologically, your body is always changing. Cells die and regenerate. Even your brain rewires itself constantly in response to new experiences. That process is called neuroplasticity. So the brain you wake up with today isn't exactly the same as the one you had yesterday. It's slightly updated, like software getting constant patches. Psychologically, your identity is shaped by memories, habits, emotions, and beliefs. These things evolve. A conversation, a piece of news, or even a moment of reflection can shift how you think. You might not notice it right away, but day by day, your inner world changes. So what stays the same? Some say it's the continuity of memory. As long as you remember being you, the chain remains unbroken. Others argue it's the pattern, your personality, values, or the general way you move through life, even if some details shift. Then there's the deeper question of what identity really means. Is it about your physical body, your thoughts, your role in society? Depending on the answer, being the same person might not mean staying exactly the same, but remaining part of a moving story that still holds together. In this view, identity isn't frozen, it's a process. And being you might be less about staying fixed and more about staying connected to the evolving version of yourself. Is free will an illusion? It feels like we make choices all the time. What to eat, where to go, what to say. But some scientists and philosophers argue that free will might not be as real as it seems. Free will is the idea that we choose our actions independently, based on our own thoughts and desires. In everyday life, this makes sense. You decide what to wear or whether to hit snooze. No one is forcing you. But if you look closer, things get more complicated. Much of what influences our decisions happens below the surface. Our genes, upbringing, past experiences, and even current mood all shape how we respond to situations. And neuroscience has shown that the brain often starts preparing for an action before a person is even aware they've made a decision. In some experiments, brain activity can predict a person's choice before they consciously know it. This raises the question, if your brain is already on its way to a decision before you're aware of it, are you really choosing or just watching it happen? Some scientists argue that free will is more like a feeling than a fact, a way the brain interprets its own behavior after the fact. From this view, choices are the result of processes you don't control, even if they feel personal. Others push back and say this misses the bigger picture. Even if unconscious factors play a role, people still think, reason, and weigh options. That's not total freedom, but it's not pure automation either. It's a kind of guided flexibility, so free will might not be absolute control, but it's also not zero control. Whether it's an illusion or just limited by biology and context, the debate shows how complex human decision-making really is. What is the meaning of life? People have asked it for thousands of years. What's the meaning of life? It sounds like one big question, but it actually breaks into a few different ones. First, is there an objective meaning, something built into the universe itself? Or is meaning something we create for ourselves? In religion, the meaning of life is often tied to a higher purpose. Many traditions teach that life is a test, a journey, or a gift, with some kind of spiritual goal or destination. In that view, meaning comes from serving, obeying, or connecting with something beyond human understanding. In philosophy, some thinkers argue that life has no built-in purpose, and that can be freeing rather than depressing. If there's no external meaning handed to us, then we're free to create our own. That might mean building relationships, solving problems, exploring the world, or simply living in a way that feels right to us. Biology takes a more functional view. From an evolutionary perspective, the purpose of life is to survive and reproduce. That's what life forms are naturally wired to do. But that explanation doesn't always satisfy when people are looking for a deeper sense of fulfillment or direction. Then there's meaning as a psychological experience. Research shows that people find meaning through goals, personal values, and feeling connected to something bigger than themselves. It doesn't have to be cosmic. It could come from raising a family, creating art, helping others, or contributing to a community. So when people ask about the meaning of life, they're often mixing together science, philosophy, and personal feeling. There's no single answer that covers it all, but the question itself has guided how humans think, act, and reflect for as long as we've been around. Does life need a purpose to be valuable? Not everyone knows their purpose in life, and not everyone needs one to feel that life is worth living. Purpose is often thought of as a clear reason for existence, some goal, mission, or role that gives direction to everything you do. It can come from work, family, faith, or a cause you believe in. For many people, having a purpose helps organize life and makes decisions feel more meaningful. But purpose isn't the only way to find value. Life can be meaningful through experiences, relationships, and moments that don't point toward a larger goal. Laughing with friends, enjoying a good meal, or watching a sunset, these don't necessarily fulfill a bigger purpose, but they can still feel deeply valuable. Some philosophers argue that meaning and value are two separate things. Meaning often implies structure or intention. Value, on the other hand, can exist on its own. A short life filled with love and joy can still be valuable, even if it had no grand plan behind it. In psychology, studies show that people can experience life satisfaction in different ways. Some feel fulfilled by long-term goals. Others find it in day-to-day enjoyment or in connections with others. Value doesn't always have to be tied to productivity or legacy. Even in nature, most living things survive, grow, and interact without needing a purpose. A flower doesn't need to justify its existence. It simply is. When we apply that thinking to human life, the question becomes less about having a single reason for being alive, and more about how we experience being alive at all. So while having a purpose can be powerful, it's not the only way for life to be valuable. Sometimes value is found in the living itself, not in what it's all supposed to mean. Can meaning be created? Meaning often feels like something you discover, like it's hidden somewhere, waiting to be found. But what if it can also be made? The idea that meaning can be created suggests that it doesn't have to come from outside sources like religion, fate, or universal truths. Instead, it can come from the choices people make, the values they hold, and the way they live their lives. In this view, meaning isn't something we uncover, it's something we build. For example, think of someone who spends years helping others in their community. There may not be a cosmic reason behind their actions, but over time, their work becomes meaningful, both to them and to the people they've helped. That meaning didn't exist beforehand. It was created through experience and intention. Philosophers like existentialists argue that life doesn't come with built-in meaning, and that's not necessarily a bad thing. It means people are free to define meaning for themselves through relationships, creativity, learning, or simply by how they respond to life's challenges. Even in psychology, research supports this idea. People who report having a strong sense of meaning often describe it in personal terms, raising children, caring for others, or dedicating themselves to a cause. These aren't universal truths, They're human experiences that become meaningful through time and effort. This doesn't mean meaning is random. It often forms around things that matter deeply to us. But it does mean that meaning doesn't have to be handed down from above. It can grow out of what we choose to care about, how we spend our time, and what we decide is worth doing. So rather than being a fixed answer, meaning can be seen as an ongoing process, something people shape, develop, and carry with them throughout their lives. Is there a universal purpose or only personal ones? People often talk about finding their purpose, but it raises a bigger question. Does everyone share a universal purpose, or is purpose something personal? A universal purpose would mean that life has a built-in goal, something that applies to everyone, everywhere, no matter who they are. In many religious and philosophical traditions, this idea is common. Some say the purpose of life is to serve a higher power, reach enlightenment, or contribute to the greater good. These views suggest there's a larger blueprint, and individuals play a role within it. But modern science doesn't point to any specific universal goal. From a biological perspective, life simply exists. Organisms evolve, adapt, and reproduce. That's function, not meaning. There's no built-in plan for happiness, wisdom, or moral growth. Those are things humans think about, not nature. This leads to the idea that purpose might be personal. Instead of being assigned a mission, people define their own, based on interests, values, or experiences. One person might find purpose in raising a family. Another might find it in solving problems, building things, or creating art. These are all different, but they're meaningful in ways that matter to the individual. In psychology, researchers have found that people are more resilient, motivated, and satisfied when they feel a strong sense of personal purpose, even if that purpose is unique to them. It doesn't have to be grand or universal. It just has to feel significant. That doesn't mean people live in isolation. Personal purposes often involve helping others, building communities, or contributing to something bigger. But the path to purpose looks different for everyone. So whether or not there's a single universal goal, people still find meaning in what they choose, care about, and commit themselves to, one purpose at a time. Why do we search for meaning? People want their lives to matter. That's why, across cultures and generations, humans have searched for meaning, trying to understand not just how life works, but why it exists. The search for meaning is part of how we make sense of the world. Unlike most animals, humans don't just respond to their surroundings. We reflect on them. We ask big picture questions, like where we come from, what we're supposed to do, and whether our actions count for something. This drive isn't just philosophical, it's also psychological. In psychology, meaning gives people a framework. It helps them organize experiences, make decisions, and set goals. When life feels chaotic or uncertain, meaning acts like a stabilizer. It helps explain hardships and gives people a reason to keep going. That's especially clear in times of crisis, loss, illness, or major change. In those moments, the question of why becomes more than abstract. It becomes personal. From an evolutionary perspective, the ability to find meaning may have had real survival benefits. Groups that shared stories, values, and beliefs could bond more strongly. Meaning helped people cooperate, endure hardship, and pass on knowledge. It made communities more resilient. At a cultural level, meaning shows up in religion, art, science, and even law. People use symbols, rituals, and systems to express what they value and to feel part of something bigger. That search doesn't always lead to the same answer, But the act of searching itself seems to be universal. So while the exact definition of meaning might change from person to person, the need to find meaning remains constant. It's one of the ways humans make life feel connected, understandable, and worth living, even when the answers aren't always clear. What makes something meaningful? Not everything in life feels meaningful. Some things stick with us. Others pass by without a second thought. So what exactly makes something meaningful? Meaning isn't built into objects or events. It's something we assign. What feels meaningful often connects to things we care about, our goals, our values, or our relationships. For example, a handwritten note might seem like a small thing, but if it comes from someone important during a difficult time, it can feel deeply meaningful. Psychologists have studied what gives an experience a sense of meaning. 3 common ingredients tend to show up: purpose, coherence, and significance. Purpose means the experience feels tied to something bigger, like working toward a goal or helping someone else. Coherence means it makes sense. It fits into the story we tell ourselves about our lives. Significance means it feels emotionally important, like it matters beyond just the moment. This is why something as simple as volunteering for a cause, raising a child, or finishing a personal project can feel meaningful. These experiences connect to long-term values, provide a sense of progress, and resonate emotionally. They're not just tasks, they're tied to identity. What makes something meaningful also depends on context. A quiet walk might feel ordinary one day, but deeply reflective the next. A job can feel meaningful if it aligns with your strengths and beliefs, or meaningless if it feels disconnected from what you value. Meaning can also grow over time. Some moments don't seem important until we look back and realize how they shaped us. Reflection helps people understand why something mattered, even if it didn't feel that way in the moment. So while meaning isn't always obvious, it usually comes from connection, to purpose, to understanding, or to something that feels personally significant. Is happiness the purpose of life? Most people want to be happy. It's a feeling that makes life enjoyable, fulfilling, and worth living. But whether happiness is the purpose of life, or just one part of it, is a much bigger question. Happiness is usually understood as a positive emotional state: joy, satisfaction, peace, or contentment. It can come from small pleasures like a good meal, or deeper experiences like love and achievement. From this view, it makes sense to think of happiness as a goal. A life filled with more good than bad feels like a life well lived. Some philosophies and belief systems even put happiness at the center. In Western thought, this often shows up as the idea of the pursuit of happiness. In Eastern traditions, like certain schools of Buddhism, happiness comes from reducing suffering and gaining inner balance. Across cultures, the idea shows up in different forms. But happiness doesn't always tell the full story. Many people find purpose through struggle, sacrifice, or hard work, even when it's not enjoyable in the moment. Raising a child, caring for a loved one, or fighting for a cause can be exhausting or painful, but still feel deeply meaningful. That's why some researchers and philosophers draw a line between happiness and meaning. Happiness is about how you feel. Meaning is about how connected or purposeful your life seems. Sometimes those two things overlap, but not always. There's also the challenge of chasing happiness directly. Studies show that people who focus too much on being happy often end up feeling less satisfied, especially if things don't go as planned. In contrast, people who focus on growth, values, or helping others often report feeling happier as a side effect. So happiness might be a part of life's purpose, but not necessarily the whole story. It may be one outcome among several that make life feel complete. Does suffering have a purpose? Pain, loss, stress. No one enjoys suffering, and yet it's something every human experiences. So the question arises, does suffering have a purpose? Biologically, suffering serves a clear function. Physical pain signals that something's wrong. It keeps us from touching hot surfaces or putting weight on an injured limb. Emotional pain works in a similar way. It can point to broken relationships, unmet needs, or harmful situations. From an evolutionary standpoint, suffering helps us survive by pushing us to avoid danger and correct course when things go wrong. But beyond survival, suffering can also shape behavior, identity, and perspective. People who go through difficult experiences often report learning from them. They may develop resilience, compassion, or a deeper appreciation for life. For example, recovering from a serious illness might not be good, but it can lead someone to prioritize health or relationships in new ways. In psychology, this idea is known as post-traumatic growth. It doesn't mean suffering is desirable, but it suggests that hardship can lead to positive changes in values, purpose, and inner strength, especially when there's support and time to heal. In many belief systems, suffering is tied to moral or spiritual development. It's seen as a test, a path to wisdom, or a reminder of what really matters. While not all people agree with that perspective, it reflects a long-standing human effort to make sense of pain. Still, suffering isn't always productive. Some forms, like chronic illness or deep injustice, bring more damage than growth. That's why most approaches to suffering involve both learning from it and reducing it wherever possible. So while suffering itself isn't a goal, it often has effects that reach beyond the moment. It shapes how people grow, connect, and find meaning, even in the hardest parts of life. Can purpose exist without belief? Purpose gives direction. It's what makes actions feel meaningful instead of random. But for many people, purpose is tightly linked to belief in a higher power, in a grand design, or in a moral framework. So the question is, can purpose exist without belief? Belief often answers the why behind purpose. In religion, for example, purpose might come from fulfilling a divine plan or serving others as a spiritual duty. That kind of belief gives life a built-in goal, something bigger than personal experience. But belief doesn't have to be religious or metaphysical. It can be belief in values, like fairness, curiosity, or creativity. A person might find purpose in education, not because of faith, but because they believe knowledge improves lives. Another might commit to environmental work based on a belief in sustainability and long-term thinking. In these cases, belief still fuels purpose, but it's grounded in human goals, not cosmic ones. Then there's an even more stripped-down version of purpose, acting with intention. You don't need to believe in a universal truth to set goals, help others, or find joy in creating something. People often feel purpose simply by doing work that matters to them, raising a family, or caring for a community. The sense of purpose comes from engagement, not from belief in any deeper narrative. Psychology supports this. Studies show people can live purposeful lives through relationships, growth, or contribution, even if they don't subscribe to any larger belief system. What matters is that the activity feels connected to something meaningful to them. So while belief can give purpose a foundation, it's not the only path. Purpose can emerge from action, values, and personal meaning, even in the absence of any overarching belief about how the world is supposed to work. Is meaning just a story we tell ourselves? Meaning feels real. People change their lives for it, make sacrifices for it, and search for it when things fall apart. But some thinkers argue that meaning might not be built into the world. It might just be a story we tell ourselves. At its core, meaning is how we connect the dots between events. It's the pattern we see in experiences, emotions, and goals. When someone says their life has meaning, they usually mean that their actions feel tied to something bigger, whether that's family, career, belief, or personal growth. But what if those connections aren't out there waiting to be discovered and are instead created inside the mind? This idea is based on how humans think. The brain is designed to find patterns. It organizes chaos into categories, events into timelines, and facts into stories. That's how we process reality. It's why two people can go through the same experience and walk away with different interpretations. One might see it as a setback. Another might see it as a turning point. Even memory plays a role. We don't remember everything equally. We highlight certain events and forget others, shaping a personal narrative that explains who we are and what we've been through. In this way, meaning becomes less like a fact and more like a frame, a way to make life feel coherent and purposeful. That doesn't make meaning fake. It just means it's flexible. It can be updated, challenged, or rebuilt as life changes. People find meaning in relationships, challenges, creativity, or belief. Not because those things come with meaning attached, but because they assign meaning to them. So rather than being discovered like a hidden treasure, meaning may be something humans construct, layer by layer, as they move through life. What is good? We all have a sense of what feels good. Helping someone, telling the truth, doing the right thing. But when it comes to defining what is good, things get more complicated. At the surface, good sounds simple. It means something positive, beneficial, or right. A good meal, a good person, a good decision. But once you start asking what makes something good, you find that people don't always agree. Is good whatever brings happiness? Is it about fairness? Is it about following rules? Different moral systems answer that question in different ways. One approach is utilitarianism, the idea that good is whatever creates the most happiness or reduces suffering for the most people. Another is deontology, which focuses on duties and rules. In that view, telling the truth is good, even if it doesn't lead to the best outcome. Then there's virtue ethics, which defines good as developing good character, traits like kindness, honesty, or courage. Across cultures, many of these ideas overlap. Most societies value compassion, fairness, and cooperation. But even then, what counts as good behavior can depend on context. One person's act of loyalty might look like betrayal to someone else, and in complex situations, good and bad can be mixed together. There's also a psychological angle. People often feel something is good when it aligns with their values or benefits their community. But feelings alone can be unreliable. What feels good in the moment isn't always good in the long run, for ourselves or others. So, good isn't a single rule or definition. It's a concept shaped by experience, culture, and reasoning. It helps guide decisions, shape behavior, and build societies. But it stays open to debate, because what's good for one person or group may not be good for another. What is evil? Some actions are so harmful, so destructive, that people call them evil. But while the word is common, the idea behind it is harder to define. Evil is usually used to describe extreme wrongdoing, acts that cause deliberate pain, cruelty, or injustice. It's not just about breaking rules or making mistakes. It's about doing harm with full awareness, or without any concern for the damage caused. Examples often include things like torture, murder, or genocide. These are actions that most people across cultures recognize as deeply wrong. But the concept of evil goes beyond just labeling certain acts. It raises questions about motive, intention, and responsibility. Some view evil as a force, something that exists outside individuals and influences behavior. Others see it as a label we apply to certain people or choices when they cross a moral line. Philosophers have long debated whether evil is a separate category or just the extreme end of bad behavior. One view is that evil involves not just harm, but a failure to recognize others as human, treating people as objects, tools, or obstacles. In this view, what makes something evil is the absence of empathy or moral concern. There's also the idea of banal evil, when people commit harmful acts not out of hatred or rage, but simply by following orders, avoiding responsibility, or staying silent. In those cases, evil doesn't look dramatic, it looks ordinary. That makes it harder to spot and harder to stop. So while evil is often associated with the worst crimes, it can also exist in small, quiet decisions that add up over time. It's a word we use to describe a breakdown in morality so severe that it shocks the conscience and forces us to confront what we think human beings are capable of. Is morality objective or subjective? People often say something is right or wrong as if it's obvious. But is morality based on universal rules? Or is it shaped by personal and cultural views? This is the debate between objective and subjective morality. If morality is objective, it means some actions are right or wrong no matter what anyone thinks. Lying, stealing, or harming others would be wrong regardless of culture, situation, or personal opinion. Objective morality suggests that ethical truths exist independently, like math or gravity. Subjective morality, on the other hand, says that ideas of right and wrong depend on individual beliefs or social norms. What's considered moral in one society might not be in another. For example, dietary rules, marriage customs, or justice systems can vary widely across cultures. In this view, morality is more like taste. It reflects values shaped by time, place, and perspective. Some argue that objective morality is necessary. Without it, it's hard to criticize things like slavery or genocide in societies where those practices were once accepted. Others argue that moral progress itself, like expanding rights or protecting the vulnerable, shows that morality evolves and that no set of rules is fixed forever. There's also a middle ground. Some philosophers suggest that while morality isn't absolute, it isn't random either. It might be based on shared human needs, like avoiding harm, building trust, or promoting fairness. These values show up across cultures, even if they're expressed differently. That could mean morality has a common foundation, even if it isn't perfectly universal. In practice, people often act as if some things should be right or wrong, no matter the context. But whether that belief comes from deep truth or shared agreement is still one of the biggest open questions in philosophy. Can there be right without wrong? Right and wrong are ideas we use every day, whether we're making decisions, judging behavior, or teaching kids how to act. But can the concept of right even exist if we don't have wrong to compare it to? In basic terms, right usually means acceptable, fair, or morally good. Wrong means the opposite, unacceptable, unfair, or harmful. The two ideas seem linked. You know what's right, partly because you've learned what's wrong. Without contrast, it's hard to define either one clearly. This kind of pairing shows up everywhere. Hot and cold, up and down, light and dark, all rely on comparison. Without cold, hot doesn't mean much. So one view is that right and wrong are relational. They help define each other. If nothing could ever be considered wrong, then the word right might lose its meaning entirely. It would just become normal, or worse, meaningless. Some philosophers argue that morality works like a spectrum. Actions aren't just right or wrong. They can be more or less right, more or less harmful. In this view, right and wrong aren't fixed categories, but points along a sliding scale. That means even small wrongs help us understand what better behavior looks like. Others suggest that rightness can exist on its own if it promotes well-being, fairness, or cooperation. From this angle, you don't need evil for good to exist. Acts of kindness, generosity, or honesty can be meaningful in themselves without needing a dark side for contrast. But practically speaking, right and wrong often come as a package. People learn ethics through consequences, boundaries, and reflection. In daily life, deciding what's right usually involves thinking about what would go wrong if we chose differently. So whether we define it through contrast or principle, right and wrong are deeply connected and hard to separate completely. Why do we do what we know is wrong? Everyone has done something they knew they shouldn't, stayed up too late, said something hurtful, broke a promise. The strange part isn't that we make mistakes. It's that sometimes we know better and still do it anyway. This disconnect between knowing and doing is a well-studied puzzle. Psychologists call it akrasia, which simply means acting against your better judgment. It's when a person understands the consequences, feels the guilt, and still follows through on a choice they believe is wrong. Part of the explanation comes down to how the brain processes decisions. The rational part, the prefrontal cortex, can weigh long-term consequences, moral values, and goals. But the emotional and instinctive parts of the brain, like the limbic system, respond to immediate rewards. So when someone chooses the wrong thing, it's often because the short-term urge, relief, pleasure, comfort, overrides long-term reasoning. There's also the issue of habit. When people repeat a behavior over time, even if it conflicts with their values, it can become automatic. That's why someone might lie to avoid conflict, even though they believe in honesty, or procrastinate, even knowing it leads to stress. The wrong behavior becomes the path of least resistance. Social pressure and stress play a role too. In certain environments, doing the wrong thing might feel easier or safer than standing by your values. And when emotions run high, anger, fear, insecurity, judgment can slip, even if you know better. This doesn't mean people are doomed to repeat bad decisions. It just shows that knowing what's right isn't always enough. The human mind balances emotion, habit, context, and self-control, and sometimes those forces pull in different directions. That gap between intention and action is where many of our struggles and our growth begin. Are people inherently good? When a child shares a toy or comforts a friend, it's easy to believe that people are naturally good. But history, behavior, and psychology offer a more complicated picture. The idea that people are inherently good suggests that kindness, fairness, and empathy are built into us from birth. There's evidence to support this. Studies on infants show that even very young children show signs of compassion and can distinguish helpful behavior from harmful. Evolutionary biology also supports the idea that cooperation gave early humans a survival advantage. Helping others made groups stronger. But being good doesn't mean being perfect. Humans also have instincts for self-preservation, competition, and fear of outsiders. These traits aren't evil, they're protective, but they can lead to conflict, selfishness, or cruelty, especially when people feel threatened or powerless. Whether someone acts in good or bad ways often depends on environment, upbringing, and context. A person raised in a caring, secure setting is more likely to trust others and show empathy. But under stress, in danger, or influenced by group pressure, even well-meaning people can behave in harmful ways. Philosophers and psychologists have long debated the question. Some argue that people are born good and learn bad behavior from society. Others believe the opposite, that rules, education, and culture are what guide people away from harmful instincts. In reality, human nature seems to be a mix. People come into the world with a capacity for both care and harm. What they choose depends on a range of factors: personal values, emotional control, social norms, and life experience. So rather than being purely good or bad, people are complex. Most are capable of both and spend their lives navigating that balance, one decision at a time. Can one person change the world? It's a phrase we hear all the time. One person can change the world. But in a world with billions of people and complex systems, is that really possible? On a small scale, it's easy to see how individuals make a difference. A teacher can change a student's future. A doctor can save a life. A voter can swing a local election. These actions matter, but changing the entire world sounds like a different challenge altogether. Historically, some individuals have clearly made global impact. Inventors like Thomas Edison and Marie Curie, activists like Martin Luther King Jr. and Malala Yousafzai, or scientists like Albert Einstein, each reshaped how people live, think, or organize society. But none of them acted alone. Behind every well-known figure is a network, people who supported them, learned from them, or carried their ideas forward. In reality, world-changing impact usually happens over time. One person might introduce a new idea, but it takes others to adopt it, improve it, and spread it. Social change, scientific breakthroughs, and cultural shifts often start with a spark, but they become movements when others join in. Technology has made this even more accessible. Today, a single voice can reach millions through social media. A single innovation can scale quickly. But the same tools can also amplify misinformation or cause unintended harm. So the power to change the world isn't just about action. It's about influence, timing, and responsibility. So yes, one person can be the starting point for global change, but it's rarely a solo effort. Change happens when individuals act, others respond, and the effect builds outward. The real power lies in how far an idea can go once it leaves one person's hands and enters the world. Do intentions matter more than outcomes? If someone tries to help and makes things worse, should we still credit their good intentions? Or do the consequences speak louder? This is the debate between intentions and outcomes. What matters more? What someone meant to do or what actually happened? Intentions are about motive. They reflect why someone took action in the first place. If a driver runs a red light while rushing someone to the hospital, their intention is to save a life, not to break the law. In ethics, this matters. People tend to judge actions more gently when they believe the motive was honest, helpful, or well-meaning. Outcomes, however, are about impact. A good motive doesn't guarantee a good result. If a medicine is given with the hope of healing, but ends up harming the patient, the outcome still matters, even if the doctor had the best of intentions. Some moral theories prioritize intention. For example, one view says morality depends on whether someone acted from a sense of duty or principle, regardless of the result. Others focus on consequences. If the action causes harm, then it's morally wrong, even if the person didn't mean for that to happen. In real life, both sides come into play. Courts often consider intent when judging a crime. Accidentally breaking something isn't treated the same as doing it on purpose, but they also weigh outcomes, especially when the damage is serious. Intentions show character, outcomes show effect. The challenge is that they don't always line up. Someone might mean well and still cause harm, or do good accidentally without trying. That's why moral judgment often requires both, understanding what someone hoped to do and looking honestly at what their actions actually produced. Balancing the two is how we navigate fairness, accountability, and responsibility. Is justice real? Justice feels like one of the most basic human principles. People should be treated fairly, wrongs should be corrected, and everyone should be held to the same standards. But when you look closely, the question becomes more complicated. Is justice something real, or is it just a human idea? At its core, justice is about balance. It means giving people what they deserve, whether that's protection, punishment, opportunity, or recognition. Legal systems are built on this concept. If someone commits a crime, they're supposed to face consequences. If someone's harmed, they're supposed to be made whole. But in practice, justice isn't always easy to define or deliver. Different cultures have different ideas of what counts as fair. In one place, justice might mean punishment. In another, it might mean restoration or forgiveness. Even within a single society, people often disagree about what a just outcome looks like. There's also the gap between the ideal of justice and how it works in reality. Courts can be influenced by wealth, bias, or power. Two people might commit the same crime and face very different consequences depending on their background. In these cases, justice feels more like a goal than a guarantee. Some argue that justice is a human construct, an idea we invented to manage behavior and reduce conflict. Others believe it reflects a deeper truth, something that exists beyond law or custom. From this view, justice isn't just a system, it's a moral standard, even if we don't always meet it. So is justice real? As a feeling, a value, and a social tool, yes. It shapes how people interact and what they expect from one another. But as a perfect, objective force in the world, it's more of an aspiration than a built-in part of nature. It exists because people believe in it and work to make it real. What do we owe each other? Most of us agree that people shouldn't harm each other on purpose. But beyond that, what do we actually owe one another? At the most basic level, the idea starts with social obligations. These are the small but important things that help a community function. Things like not cutting in line, keeping noise down at night, or following traffic rules. They don't require deep relationships, just mutual respect. It's about living in a shared space without making it worse for everyone else. But the question gets more complicated when we consider fairness and responsibility. For example, should people with more resources be expected to help those with less? Do we owe more to people in our own communities than to strangers in other parts of the world? These aren't just moral questions. They show up in real-world decisions about taxes, healthcare, education, and even voting. Some philosophers argue that we owe each other certain basic guarantees, like safety, opportunity, and freedom, just because we're part of the same society. Others say that we don't owe anything beyond not causing harm. It's a disagreement about whether being human comes with built-in responsibilities to other humans, or whether each person is fundamentally on their own unless they choose otherwise. There's also the issue of proximity. If you see someone collapse on the street, most people would agree you should help. But what if the person is halfway around the world? Does the obligation fade with distance? Or does technology change that by making us all more connected? Ultimately, what do we owe each other isn't just a question about ethics. It's about how we live together. It affects everything from personal choices to national policies. And while there may not be a single answer, the fact that we ask the question at all shows how much we depend on each other, even in ways we don't always notice. What is love? Love is one of the most familiar feelings we have, and also one of the hardest to explain. At its simplest, love is a deep emotional bond. It can be romantic, like in a relationship. It can be protective, like a parent toward a child. It can be friendly, like the loyalty between longtime companions. In all its forms, love usually involves care, commitment, and a desire for another person's well-being. Biologically, love shows up in the brain as a cocktail of chemicals, dopamine, oxytocin, serotonin, that make us feel safe, connected, or rewarded. These patterns helped our ancestors form strong social groups, raise children, and survive together. But while the biology might explain the mechanics, it doesn't capture the experience. Psychologically, love is often described as a mix of passion, intimacy, and long-term commitment. Not all types of love include all three. A crush might be full of passion, but short on trust. A lifelong friendship might be high in connection, but not romantic. And many forms of love shift over time. What begins with excitement might settle into routine. Or what starts as care might grow into something deeper. Love also has a cultural side. Different societies have different ideas about how love should look, who it should involve, and what role it plays in life. Some cultures tie love closely to marriage. Others see it more as an individual experience, separate from obligation. At its core, love is the feeling that someone matters, enough to pay attention, to stay close, or to sacrifice when needed. And while love isn't always easy to define, it remains a central part of how humans connect, cooperate, and find meaning in life. Even when it's imperfect or messy, love plays a powerful role in shaping who we are and how we treat each other. Why do we crave connection? We check our phones, look for eye contact, and feel lighter after a conversation. Not because we're bored, but because connection is something we're wired to need. At a basic level, humans are social animals. Thousands of years ago, being part of a group was key to survival. You hunted together, shared resources, protected each other from danger. If you were alone, your odds of surviving dropped sharply. Over time, the brain adapted to reward behaviors that kept people close. Things like empathy, cooperation, and attachment. That evolutionary design still shows up today. When we feel connected, the brain releases chemicals like oxytocin and dopamine. These not only make us feel good in the moment, but also reinforce the behavior that caused it. A warm hug, a shared laugh, or even just being seen can calm stress, regulate emotion, and build trust. But it's not just about feeling safe. Connection also helps us understand ourselves. Interacting with others gives us feedback on how we come across, what we value, and where we belong. That's why things like isolation or rejection can feel more painful than they logically should. They aren't just unpleasant, they signal something deeper. Disconnection from a system we're built to rely on. As we grow, our need for connection becomes more complex. It's not just about survival anymore. It's about meaning. Friendships, families, communities, even strangers online. They all offer a chance to be heard, to be understood, and to matter. And in a world that often feels overwhelming, those small moments of connection can ground us, making us feel a little more human. So while technology, culture, and lifestyle evolve, the craving for connection remains. It's not weakness, it's a feature, one that helps us cooperate, grow, and make sense of life together. Can anyone be truly known? We spend our entire lives around other people, family, friends, co-workers, and yet no one can ever fully see the world exactly as we do. The idea of being truly known sounds simple at first. You share your thoughts, feelings, preferences. Someone listens, understands, and connects the dots. But there's a catch. Most of what makes up a person isn't visible on the surface. There's what they say, what they don't say, what they feel but can't express, and even what they don't fully understand about themselves. Even in close relationships, we rely on what others choose to reveal. And even then, their words pass through our own mental filters, our assumptions, biases, and interpretations. For example, two people can hear the same sentence and take away completely different meanings based on their own life experiences. That makes perfect understanding tricky from the start. There's also the issue of change. People evolve. The version of you someone understood last year might not be the same person you are now. Preferences shift. Beliefs adapt. Memories fade or get rewritten over time. So even if someone gets close to understanding you today, that understanding might become outdated tomorrow. This doesn't mean connection is impossible. It just means it has limits. We get glimpses of each other, patterns, habits, reactions, enough to build trust, form relationships, and share meaning. But full access? Total understanding. That's probably out of reach, even for ourselves. What we call knowing someone is often a mix of familiarity, consistency, and empathy. It's about understanding enough to care, to relate, and to act with respect. And while we may never fully step inside another person's mind, we get close enough to matter, and that's often enough to hold a relationship together. Why are we afraid of being alone? Most people enjoy a little time alone, but too much of it can start to feel uncomfortable. At its core, the fear of being alone isn't just about physical isolation. It's about disconnection, feeling like no one sees you, hears you, or understands what you're going through. Humans are social creatures. From early evolution, survival depended on being part of a group. Being left out meant fewer resources, more danger, and a lower chance of making it. That deep-rooted instinct didn't disappear just because we live in cities now. Today, the fear of being alone can show up in smaller ways. Scrolling endlessly just to feel connected. Checking your phone after sending a message and wondering why there's no reply. These aren't life or death moments, but they tap into the same emotional wiring. There's also the mental side. When we're alone, distractions fade. We're left with our own thoughts, and that can be uncomfortable. Unresolved feelings, regrets, or worries tend to bubble up. In silence, there's nowhere to hide from them. So sometimes we avoid solitude, not because we don't like being by ourselves, but because we don't like what we might have to face internally. Culturally, there's pressure too. Being alone is often viewed as a problem to fix. Ads, media, and social expectations tend to frame connection as the goal, and isolation as something to escape. So even if solitude is natural, it can feel like a failure just because of how society frames it. But it's not just emotional. There's a practical layer too. People rely on others for support, financial, emotional, or just simple companionship. Being alone can raise concerns about who will help in a crisis or celebrate during good times. The fear comes from both the heart and the head, layered together in a way that makes it feel bigger than it is. Is it better to love or be loved? It's one of those questions that sounds simple, but pulls in two very different sides of human experience. Is it better to love or to be loved? Loving someone can be one of the most powerful feelings in the world. It brings purpose, energy, and a sense of meaning. When you love, you invest in someone else's well-being. You care deeply, you show up, and you give part of yourself. But there's a risk. It's not always returned. Loving can make you feel alive, but it can also make you feel vulnerable. Being loved, on the other hand, means safety. It's reassurance. Knowing someone cares about you can build confidence, reduce anxiety, and give you a sense of belonging. But if you don't feel the same way back, it can also feel empty. You might appreciate the kindness or support, but if it's not mutual, it may not connect emotionally in the same way. Psychologically, loving tends to be more active. It's something you do. Being loved is more passive. It's something you receive. Some argue that the act of loving creates a stronger foundation for happiness than simply receiving affection. But others point out that being loved first can teach someone how to love in return. Especially for people who grew up without stable emotional bonds, being loved may be the essential first step. There's also the issue of control. You can choose to love, but you can't force someone to love you. So the experience of loving might feel more within your power, while being loved depends more on others. Ultimately, both sides play a role in relationships. One isn't necessarily more important than the other. They just offer different kinds of fulfillment, and both are part of what makes human connections so complex. Can love last forever? Some people say love fades. Others say it deepens over time. But the question sticks: can love actually last forever? To answer that, we first need to understand what kind of love we're talking about. Romantic love often begins with intensity, emotional highs, constant attention, and physical attraction. But this stage, called infatuation or passionate love, is usually temporary. It's driven by brain chemistry, like dopamine and oxytocin, and tends to wear off after a year or two. What comes next is sometimes called companionate love. This form of love is calmer, more stable. It's built on trust, shared goals, routines, and long-term care. While it may not have the same thrill as the early stage, it can offer something even more durable, a sense of home. Research shows that long-lasting love is possible, but it doesn't happen by accident. Couples who maintain it tend to show regular appreciation, communicate openly, and adapt to changes together. They turn shared experiences into shared meaning. Still, lasting love doesn't always look the same. It might evolve. A couple who laugh their way through their 20s might bond over caregiving in their 60s. The form changes, but the connection stays intact. There's also the question of memory and idealization. Sometimes, even after separation or death, people feel their love for someone never went away. That feeling isn't just nostalgia. It's evidence that love can leave a lasting imprint, even if the relationship doesn't continue in the same way. So, can love last forever? Biologically, it changes. Emotionally, it matures. And psychologically, it can stay rooted for a lifetime, if it adapts. Love that lasts isn't just a feeling that stays the same. It's a connection that survives change. What makes a relationship real? A relationship doesn't become real just because two people call it one. It becomes real when there's something beneath the surface, something consistent, mutual, and lived over time. At its simplest, a relationship is a connection between people. But what makes it feel real isn't the label, it's the experience. Two co-workers might spend years side by side, yet never develop a real relationship. Meanwhile, two strangers stuck in an airport overnight might talk for hours and build something that feels surprisingly genuine. So what's the difference? A real relationship usually has three key parts: emotional honesty, shared attention, and trust. Emotional honesty means being open about what you think or feel, even when it's uncomfortable. Shared attention means both people care about the connection and show up for it, not just physically, but mentally and emotionally. And trust is what allows both of those things to happen without fear of being judged, dismissed, or ignored. Time can help, but it doesn't guarantee depth. Some long relationships stay shallow because the people in them never take emotional risks. Others grow quickly when both people are willing to be real from the start. It's not about how often you talk, but how real the conversations are when you do. There's also mutual investment. If one person is doing all the work, checking in, listening, supporting, then the relationship starts to feel one-sided. Realness comes when both people contribute and care, not out of obligation, but because they genuinely want to. Even silence can be real. Sitting quietly with someone, without needing to perform or entertain, is often a sign of a comfortable, grounded connection. Ultimately, what makes a relationship real isn't how it looks from the outside. It's how consistently both people show up and stay present for what's happening between them. Is loneliness part of being human? Loneliness isn't just something that happens to people. It's something people are built to feel. At its core, loneliness is the feeling of being disconnected from others, from a sense of belonging, or even from meaning. It's not the same as being alone. You can be surrounded by people and still feel lonely, and you can be alone and feel completely at peace. Loneliness isn't about numbers, it's about connection. From an evolutionary perspective, humans are social animals. Early survival depended on group cooperation. So our brains developed warning signals, emotions like loneliness, to alert us when we were drifting away from the group. In that way, loneliness is like hunger. It's not a failure. It's a signal that something important is missing. But here's the twist. Unlike hunger, which is solved by food, loneliness is harder to fix. Not every social interaction cures it. Some people feel lonelier in a crowd than they do alone in their room. That's because the cure isn't just contact, it's connection, it's feeling seen, heard, and understood. And this is where loneliness becomes part of the human experience, not just a glitch in it. No one's mind perfectly matches another's. Everyone walks around with thoughts and feelings that no one else will ever fully grasp. Even in close relationships, there's a gap between what's felt and what's shared. Loneliness slips into that gap. Art, language, storytelling. These are ways people try to bridge the gap. They're not just for entertainment. They're tools for connection, created by humans who felt something they couldn't carry alone. So while loneliness can be painful, it also points to something deeper. It reveals how much connection matters, and how much of being human involves reaching for it, even when we fall short. Are we meant to be with others? Most people don't just want others in their life, they need them. Being around others isn't just a preference. It's tied to how humans evolved. For thousands of years, survival wasn't something you could do on your own. You needed others to hunt, protect, share, and cooperate. So over time, the human brain adapted to thrive in groups. It developed social instincts, emotional cues, and even physical responses that made connection feel rewarding and isolation feel painful. This isn't just history, it shows up in everyday life. Shared laughter makes things feel funnier. Grief feels lighter when someone sits with you. And even small acts, like holding the door for a stranger, offer a strange kind of satisfaction that's hard to explain in purely logical terms. Psychologists sometimes call humans ultra-social, meaning our well-being depends on deep, lasting bonds. That includes family ties, friendships, romantic relationships, and community connections. These relationships don't just offer company, they affect everything from physical health to how long people live. Loneliness, for example, has been linked to higher risk of heart disease, weaker immune systems, and shorter lifespans. Still, meant to be with others doesn't mean everyone has to be social all the time. People vary in how much connection they need. Some recharge with company, while others recharge alone. But even those who enjoy solitude usually seek connection in some form, through stories, shared experiences, or moments of quiet understanding with another person. Even technology reflects this drive. People build tools not just to survive, but to connect. Writing, phones, social networks. And in almost every culture, the idea of a good life includes being part of something larger than just oneself. So whether through family, friendship, or community, humans seem wired to reach for others, not just for support, but because it's built into how we function. Can love exist without attachment? Most people think of love and attachment as one and the same, but they're not. Love is often described as the feeling of deep care or affection towards someone. Attachment, on the other hand, is more about the emotional bond that forms over time, the feeling that you need the other person in your life. These two experiences usually go hand in hand, especially in close relationships, but they don't always have to. Attachment tends to come with expectations. You want the person to stay. You want their attention. You might even feel unsettled when they're not around. This kind of attachment isn't necessarily unhealthy. It's part of how human relationships work. But it's different from the pure feeling of love, which doesn't always require possession or permanence. Some people argue that love without attachment is actually more stable. In this view, love means caring for someone without trying to control them. It means wanting the best for them, even if that means letting them go. Parents sometimes feel this when their child grows up and moves away. The love doesn't disappear. It just exists without needing to hold on so tightly. This idea shows up in certain philosophies and spiritual traditions. For example, some forms of Buddhism encourage compassion without clinging. The goal is to love without becoming dependent, to care without turning that care into fear of loss. That's hard to do in practice, but it offers a different way of thinking about connection. In everyday life, the difference can show up in how people handle conflict, distance, or change. When love is mixed with strong attachment, it can lead to anxiety or resentment. When it's based on respect and trust, even without constant closeness, it can remain steady. So love and attachment are linked, but they're not the same thing. What is death? Death is something every living thing eventually faces, yet it remains one of the most difficult concepts to fully understand. At its most basic level, death is the end of biological life. It's when a body stops functioning. No more heartbeat, no brain activity, no breathing. From a medical standpoint, that's what separates someone who's alive from someone who's not. Cells stop working, systems shut down, and the body begins to break down. It's a biological event, and for scientists, it marks the final stage in an organism's life cycle. But death isn't just a physical process. For most people, it also carries emotional and philosophical weight. Losing someone often means more than just the absence of their body. It means the end of shared experiences, conversations, and presence. That's why death can feel more like an emotional absence than a scientific event. Different cultures and belief systems approach death in very different ways. Some view it as a transition to an afterlife, a continuation in a different form. Others see it as a natural final chapter, with no continuation beyond memory and legacy. Both perspectives shape how people mourn, celebrate, or prepare for death. On a psychological level, the idea of death also forces us to think about time. We make plans, set goals, and build relationships knowing that life is limited. That awareness changes how people live, often giving urgency or meaning to everyday moments. In practical terms, death also plays a role in how societies operate, through things like wills, funerals, or legal definitions of life and personhood. It's not just personal, it's deeply social, touching everything from family to law to medicine. So while the body may stop, the idea of death keeps going in the lives and minds of those still here. Is there life after death? No one has ever come back from death with proof of what happens next. That's what makes the question of life after death so persistent and so debated. At its core, the idea asks whether anything continues after the body dies. Some people believe in a soul or consciousness that survives. Others think death is the end of awareness altogether. And there's a long history of stories, traditions, and religious beliefs built around both views. Most major religions offer a version of life after death. Some describe a heaven or hell. Others speak of reincarnation, where a soul is reborn into a new body. These beliefs often serve more than a spiritual purpose. They provide comfort, structure, and a way to think about morality and justice beyond this life. On the other hand, many scientific perspectives see no evidence for an afterlife. From this angle, consciousness is seen as a product of brain activity. When the brain shuts down, so does awareness. This view is grounded in what we can observe and measure, and it leans on biology rather than belief. There are also in-between positions. Some philosophers suggest we simply don't know enough to answer the question either way. Others explore ideas from quantum physics or near-death experiences, but these remain speculative and controversial. For some, life after death isn't necessarily about floating spirits or eternal reward. It can also mean the impact someone leaves behind, their influence on others, the memories people carry, or the work they did. That's a kind of continuation, even if it's not literal survival. So while the answers differ widely, the question stays the same. It touches on science, religion, culture, and emotion, all in one, and it continues to shape how people live, grieve, and imagine what comes next. What does it mean to die? Death isn't just the moment a heart stops beating. It's a complex biological and philosophical event that marks the end of a person's life as we know it. Medically, death is defined in stages. The most basic is clinical death, when breathing and circulation stop. But that's not necessarily permanent. With medical intervention, someone in clinical death can sometimes be revived. Brain death, however, is considered final. That's when all brain activity stops, including the brainstem, which controls basic functions like breathing. At that point, even if machines keep the heart beating, the person is considered legally and irreversibly dead. But the meaning of death stretches beyond biology. It's also about the end of a person's subjective experience. When someone dies, their thoughts, memories, sensations, everything that made their inner world cease. From a physical standpoint, the body begins to break down. Cells lose function, tissues decompose, and the biological systems that once maintained life no longer operate. Culturally, the meaning of death varies. In some traditions, it's a transition to another state of being. In others, it's viewed as a natural conclusion, much like a book reaching its final page. These interpretations often guide how people approach mourning, legacy, and the rituals that follow death. There's also a psychological aspect. For the people still living, someone's death often changes the way their life is remembered. A person becomes part of memory rather than experience. Their influence continues, but their presence is gone. This shift plays a big role in how we understand death, not just as an end, but as a transformation in how someone exists in the world. So, to die means more than physical shutdown. It's the boundary between being and not being, shaped by science, society, and the meaning people assign to it. Can death be meaningful? Death is usually seen as an end, quiet, sudden, or slow, but always final. And yet, people often talk about a meaningful death as if even our final moment can somehow serve a purpose. At the most basic level, a meaningful death is one that leaves a lasting impact. That could be someone who dies protecting others, whose actions in their final moments save lives, or someone whose death draws attention to a cause, sparking social change or shifting public awareness. These aren't just tragic events. They become turning points, markers in a story that push others to act, reflect, or grow. But meaning doesn't have to come from dramatic events. A person's death might lead their family to reconnect after years of distance. It might push someone to reevaluate how they're living their own life. In that way, the meaning isn't in the death itself. It's in how others respond to it. For those who are dying, there's also the idea of finding meaning in how they face the end. Some use their final days to resolve unfinished conversations, to give advice, or to offer comfort to those around them. It might be about leaving behind memories, letters, or simply spending time in a way that feels intentional. Not all deaths feel meaningful, of course. Many feel random or unfair. But the human tendency to look for patterns, to search for reason, often leads us to build meaning, even when none was planned. Whether through legacy, influence, or reflection, the concept of a meaningful death helps people process loss and find direction in the aftermath. So while death may end a life, it can also become a moment that shapes many others, giving it a significance that goes beyond the event itself. Is it possible to live forever? Living forever sounds like science fiction, but it's a question scientists, philosophers, and tech entrepreneurs are all taking seriously. The idea is simple. Can we extend human life indefinitely, either by slowing aging, repairing damage, or transferring our minds into something more durable? Biologically, our bodies aren't built to last forever. Cells age, DNA breaks down, and systems eventually fail. That's aging. But some researchers are working on ways to slow or even reverse these processes. There's real science behind it. Studies on telomeres, stem cells, and caloric restriction have all shown promise in extending lifespan, at least in animals. Then there's the more radical approach, escaping biology entirely. Some futurists believe we might eventually upload our consciousness into machines. If our thoughts and memories could be copied into software, then maybe we could live on in digital form. But that idea runs into deep philosophical questions. If a copy of your mind exists on a hard drive, is it really still you, or just a simulation? Another angle is medical technology. Organ regeneration, gene editing, and AI-assisted diagnostics are helping people live longer and healthier lives. If these advances continue, we might not become immortal, but we could live well past 100 with fewer of the issues aging brings. Of course, living forever isn't just about the body or the brain, it's also about meaning. What would endless life actually look like, socially and emotionally? Those aren't technical questions, but they matter just as much. So, is it possible to live forever? Biologically, not yet. Digitally, maybe someday. But the question keeps pushing science, ethics, and imagination into new territory. And for now, that's what makes it such a compelling idea. Would immortality be a blessing or a curse? Living forever sounds like the ultimate win. No aging, no death, just endless time. But the idea of immortality isn't as simple as it first seems. Whether it's a blessing or a curse depends a lot on how it actually plays out. If immortality meant staying healthy and young forever, it could solve many problems. You'd never fear illness or the clock running out. You could learn more, do more, and spend as long as you wanted perfecting a skill or exploring the world. The fear of missing out would disappear because you'd have all the time in the world. But with no endpoint, life might start to feel different. Much of what drives us, urgency, ambition, even appreciation for fleeting moments, comes from the fact that our time is limited. If that pressure vanished, motivation might too. A day, a year, even a decade might start to lose meaning when you know you've got eternity ahead. Then there's the social side. What happens when you stay the same age, but everyone you love continues to age and pass on? Immortality could lead to isolation, boredom, or even emotional burnout. And if only a few people had access to it, that would create massive inequality between the mortal and the immortal. There are also practical concerns: overpopulation, resource strain, political power concentrated in the hands of those who never step aside. Immortality could freeze social progress or make the world less adaptable. In the end, immortality might sound like freedom, but it could just as easily feel like being trapped in a loop, forever moving forward, but never truly arriving. It's not just a question of lifespan. It's about how time shapes meaning, purpose, and everything in between. Why do we fear death? We all know death is inevitable, but that doesn't stop it from being deeply unsettling. The fear of death is one of the most common, persistent fears people have. And it's not just about pain or suffering, it's about the unknown. One reason we fear death is simple. We don't know what comes after. It's the ultimate uncertainty. We're used to problems we can solve, or at least understand. But death doesn't offer that. We can't remember being dead. We can't talk to someone who's experienced it and come back with answers. That blank space leaves room for anxiety. There's also the fear of non-existence. The idea that one day our thoughts, memories, and personality might just stop is difficult to process. For many, it's hard to imagine a world that continues without them in it. And that's not selfish, it's just a byproduct of self-awareness. Culturally, we also build a strong attachment to our lives. We spend decades building relationships, goals, routines. The thought of all that coming to an end feels like erasing everything we've worked for. So death becomes not just a physical event, but a loss of identity and meaning. Fear of death can also be tied to guilt or regret. People might worry about leaving things unfinished, or about how they'll be remembered. Some fear judgment or punishment, depending on their beliefs. At its core, the fear of death taps into several deep-rooted human traits: curiosity, the need for control, the desire for continuity, and the fear of being forgotten. It's not just about dying, It's about losing the only version of reality we've ever known. That's a lot for the brain to handle, and it's why, for so many, death remains not just a fact of life, but its most enduring mystery. Is anything truly lost? Sometimes things disappear and we call them lost. A favorite book, a friend who moved away, a moment we wish we could relive. But the idea that something is truly lost is more complex than it first seems. On a surface level, lost means gone or missing, no longer where we expect it to be. A set of keys misplaced, a memory that fades, a language no longer spoken. But from a broader perspective, the idea of something being truly lost starts to break down. Information, energy, even matter, these don't just vanish. In physics, the law of conservation says energy and matter can't be destroyed, only changed. A burned letter isn't gone, it's just ash and gas now. That concept stretches beyond the physical. In human experience, even forgotten moments can leave traces. An old photograph might fade, but the influence of that moment, how it shaped a person or led to a decision, can ripple far beyond its original form. A person who's passed away still exists in habits they inspired, stories people tell, or even genetic material passed down through generations. Ideas are another case. A book that goes out of print or a lost work of art might feel gone, but its impact could be embedded in later creations or in the people who once encountered it. Even if we forget where an idea came from, it might still shape the way we think or behave. In that way, lost doesn't always mean erased. It can mean transformed, scattered, or hidden from view. What we call lost may just be something we haven't found again, yet, or something that still exists in a different form. It's less about whether it's gone, and more about whether we can still recognize where it's gone to. Do we really die if we're remembered? When someone passes away, they're no longer physically here, but somehow their presence often lingers, in a laugh that sounds familiar, in a story repeated at dinner, in the way someone else picks up their habits without realizing it. It raises a strange question. If we're remembered, do we really die? Biologically, death is straightforward. The body stops functioning. Life processes end. But human identity goes beyond biology. It includes memories, influence, and impact. When someone remembers a person, how they acted, what they stood for, the things they loved, that memory can still guide decisions, offer comfort, or shape someone's outlook. Take historical figures. People like Marie Curie or Martin Luther King Jr. are long gone, but their ideas and actions are still active in the world. In that sense, they haven't entirely disappeared. Their work keeps affecting how people think and what people do. On a smaller scale, it's the same with relatives or friends. Someone might cook a family recipe just the way their grandfather did. They might hear a phrase in their head that a parent always used to say. This idea that memory preserves something of us doesn't mean the person is alive in the literal sense, but it does show that death isn't a clean break. It's possible for parts of someone to continue influencing the living through language, behavior, traditions, or shared values. Memory can even extend into things like writing, art, or digital records. These forms let people be remembered beyond their personal circles. They leave behind a version of themselves that others can revisit. So while physical life has an endpoint, memory creates a kind of continuation. It's not immortality, but it complicates the idea that death is an absolute disappearance. In some meaningful ways, remembrance keeps certain pieces of a person in motion. Is death the end or a return? Death is something we all face, but what it means is still widely debated. Is it the final stop, or is it a kind of return to something else? Most of us are familiar with the idea of death as an ending. The body shuts down, consciousness fades, and life as we know it stops. This view is common in scientific and medical fields, where death is defined by biological markers like brain activity or a stopped heart. From that perspective, there's nothing after it, just the absence of life. But across history, many cultures have treated death as more than just a finish line. Some religious traditions describe it as a return, either to a spiritual home, to another life through reincarnation, or to some universal source. In ancient Hindu philosophy, for example, death is part of a repeating cycle, where the soul moves from one form to another. In others, like Christianity or Islam, there's the idea of an afterlife, where the soul returns to a divine presence. Even outside of religion, some people think of death as a return to nature. Our bodies break down, feed the soil, and become part of the ecosystem again. That's not a metaphor, it's literally what happens. The physical elements that make up a person rejoin the planet. There's also the psychological side. In grief, people sometimes feel a loved one's presence long after they're gone. In that way, death can feel less like a vanishing and more like a shift in form or relationship. So whether you see it as a conclusion or a kind of cycle depends on your framework, biological, philosophical, or spiritual. The idea of death as a return doesn't claim to answer everything, but it shows how endings and continuations can sometimes be two sides of the same moment. What is time? Time is something we all move through, measure, and feel, but no one can quite pin down what it actually is. In everyday life, time seems simple. It ticks forward, 1 second after another. You wake up, get dressed, eat, and go about your day. Clocks and calendars help keep track, but they don't explain what time is. They just measure how we experience change. At its core, time is a way of organizing events. It separates what's happening now from what already happened and what's still to come. Without time, everything would just happen at once, or not at all. But time isn't just a human invention. It's built into how the universe works. In physics, time is often treated as the fourth dimension, alongside the 3 dimensions of space. Together, they form what's called space-time. According to Einstein's theory of relativity, time doesn't move at a fixed rate. It actually stretches and compresses depending on things like speed and gravity. For example, time passes slightly faster for someone on a mountain than for someone at sea level. Then there's the mystery of why time seems to have a direction. We remember the past, but not the future. Eggs break, but they don't unbreak. This forward flow of time is tied to a concept called entropy, the natural tendency of systems to move from order to disorder. It's one reason why time feels like it only moves one way. Some physicists think time might not even be fundamental. It could be an emergent property, something that only appears when certain conditions are in place, like temperature or pressure. So while we experience time as steady and familiar, it's actually one of the most puzzling features of the universe, more than just minutes and hours, and far from fully understood. Is time a human invention? We check the time, set alarms, track birthdays, and count the years. Time seems built into everything we do. But is time something that exists on its own, or did humans invent it? At first glance, time feels like part of the natural world. Days pass, seasons change, people age. These are regular patterns, and they happen whether we measure them or not. But what we call time, minutes, hours, calendars, schedules, is a system humans created to track those patterns. It helps us organize life, plan events, and communicate with each other. That part is invented. Early humans used the sun's movement across the sky to divide the day. Later, we built clocks and calendars, breaking time into units, seconds, minutes, weeks, centuries. These tools are extremely useful, but they don't explain what time actually is. They just let us measure it more precisely. In physics, time is treated as a real dimension, similar to space. According to Einstein's theory of relativity, time is connected to space in a structure called space-time. It can stretch or compress depending on speed or gravity. This suggests that time isn't just something we imagine. It's built into the way the universe works. But even in physics, time is strange. Some equations don't require time to move in one direction, and in certain interpretations of quantum mechanics, time doesn't seem fundamental at all. It might be an effect that only appears when things get complex enough, like in large-scale systems. So while the measurement of time is definitely a human invention, the passage of time, whatever that means, is not just a product of our minds. It may be real, it may be emergent, or it may be something we still don't fully understand. But it's more than just a line we drew on a calendar. Does time flow or stand still? Time feels like it's always moving. Clocks tick, days pass, and things change. But when scientists look closely, the question gets stranger. Does time actually flow, or is that just how it feels? In everyday life, time seems like a river. It moves forward, carrying events with it. We remember the past, experience the present, and anticipate the future. But in physics, time doesn't work exactly that way. According to Einstein's theory of relativity, time is part of a four-dimensional structure called space-time. In this view, time isn't something that flows. It's a dimension, like height or width. Past, present, and future all exist in the same structure. They're just located in different positions, the way cities sit on a map. This idea is sometimes called the block universe, where everything that has happened is happening and will happen already exists. So if time doesn't actually flow, why does it feel like it does? One reason is entropy, the tendency of things to move from order to disorder. A glass shatters but doesn't unshatter. That creates a clear direction for time, known as the arrow of time. Without that shift, time wouldn't feel like it was moving forward at all. There's also the role of memory and consciousness. We experience moments in a sequence. We remember what just happened, but not what's next. That sense of movement might come more from how our brains process information than from time itself. Experiments with particles at the quantum level also suggest that some processes don't care about direction. Events can be reversed, and the math still works. That challenges the idea of a built-in forward flow. So while we experience time as a steady stream, physics suggests it might be more like a landscape, complete and unchanging, where movement is something we bring to the picture. Can the future already exist? We think of the future as something that hasn't happened yet, something open, undecided, still being written. But in physics, there's a serious question. Could the future already exist? In everyday life, time seems to move from the past through the present and into the future. We make choices, watch events unfold, and expect new moments to arrive. But in Einstein's theory of relativity, time isn't a flow, it's a dimension, just like space. That means every moment, past, present, and future, can be thought of as already existing within a structure called space-time. This idea leads to the concept of the block universe. Imagine time as a loaf of bread. Each slice is a moment in time. All the slices exist at once. You experience one slice at a time, but the others are still there, before and after you. So from this viewpoint, the future isn't being created. It's already in place. We're just moving through it. This doesn't mean we can see or access the future like flipping to the last page of a book. It just suggests that the future might not be as open-ended as it feels. Your birthday next year, or a decision you haven't made yet, may already have a place in the fabric of space-time, even if you haven't experienced it yet. Some physicists argue against this idea, saying that the universe is constantly unfolding, and the future only becomes real when it happens. Others point to quantum mechanics, where probabilities and randomness seem to rule, as evidence that the future isn't locked in. But from a relativity standpoint, the math works best when time is treated as a full dimension, not just what has been, but what will be, already woven into the universe's structure. Is the present real? We live in the present. It's the moment we're in, right now. But in physics and philosophy, there's a serious debate about whether the present is actually real, or just a mental snapshot. In everyday life, the present feels like the only thing that exists. The past is over, the future hasn't happened, so the present seems like a moving spotlight, highlighting what's real right now as it marches forward in time. But when you dig into physics, that idea runs into problems. According to Einstein's theory of relativity, time isn't absolute. It depends on your speed and location. Two people moving differently through space may disagree on whether two events happened at the same time. That means what feels like now for one person might not be now for someone else. This undermines the idea of a universal present. If different observers can't agree on what the present moment is, then maybe it isn't an objective slice of time. It might be something created by the brain to organize experience. Some theories go further. In the block universe model, time is like a frozen landscape. Past, present, and future all exist at once. There's no special moment called now. Our sense of moving through time may be more about how consciousness processes events than about time itself flowing. Even our experience of the present is a bit delayed. The brain takes a moment to process what we see and hear, so the now we experience is always slightly behind what's actually happening. So while the present feels solid and immediate, it may not exist as a distinct part of the universe. It might just be the way our brains frame information, marking one moment at a time in a reality that doesn't stop to separate them. Why do we remember the past and not the future? You remember brushing your teeth this morning, but not tomorrow's breakfast. We recall the past, but the future stays blank. It feels normal, but the reason why is surprisingly complicated. In basic terms, memory is the brain storing information from previous events. Those memories help us learn, plan, and make decisions. But that explanation only covers how we remember the past. It doesn't explain why we don't remember the future, especially since, in physics, the equations describing time don't actually prefer one direction over another. This leads to the concept of the arrow of time. Even though many physical laws work the same forward or backward, time in the real world seems to move one way, from low entropy to high entropy. Entropy is a measure of disorder, and the universe tends to go from more ordered states to more chaotic ones. A broken glass doesn't reassemble itself. That one-way change is what gives time its direction, and our memories follow that same path. From a biological standpoint, our brains evolved to track causes and effects. Remembering the past helps us survive. We recall what caused pain, what led to reward, and how events unfolded. Remembering the future doesn't offer that kind of advantage, at least not in the same way. So memory is tied to learning from what has happened, not predicting what will. There are also physical limits. Storing memories requires input, and the future hasn't happened yet. There's no information available to record. Some theories suggest that if we somehow received future information, like in a time loop scenario, it would violate the usual rules of cause and effect. So while time may be symmetrical in the laws of physics, our experience of it isn't. We remember the past because that's where the data is, and because that's the direction nature seems to unfold. Does anything ever truly end? A show ends, a day ends, even a life ends. But in science and philosophy, the question is much bigger. Does anything truly end? Or does it just change form? At a basic level, ending usually means something stops being the way it was. A flame goes out. A building is demolished. A phone call disconnects. But if you look closer, most endings aren't absolute. The flame stops burning, but the heat and light it gave off continue. The pieces of a building remain as rubble. Even a deleted file isn't truly gone until it's overwritten by something else. In physics, one of the most important principles is that energy can't be created or destroyed. It just changes form. The same goes for matter. An object might burn, break, or decay, but its atoms go somewhere. This is the law of conservation. So in the physical world, endings are really transformations. The idea stretches even further when you consider space and time. The universe itself might be expanding forever, cooling slowly in a process called heat death, where everything spreads out and energy runs down. That would be an end, not with a bang, but with a fade. Still, it's not a clean stop. It's more like a long, slow shift into a different state. Even personal endings, like the end of a relationship or a phase of life, usually leave some trace behind. Memories, effects, or consequences carry forward. That doesn't make the original thing less real, but it means its impact continues. So whether we're talking about objects, people, or the universe itself, most endings aren't simple disappearances. They're transitions from one state into another, where nothing fully vanishes. It just moves into the next version of itself. Are we moving through time? Or is time moving through us? It feels like we're constantly moving forward, through school, through years, through life. But when it comes to time itself, it's not clear who's doing the moving. In everyday language, we say we're moving through time, as if time is a path and we're walking across it. One moment passes, then another. We go from Monday to Tuesday, from morning to night. But physics offers a different perspective, one where time doesn't flow at all. According to Einstein's theory of relativity, time is part of a four-dimensional structure called space-time. In that model, time doesn't move any more than a street does. The past, present, and future are all part of the same static structure. So instead of flowing through time, each of us occupies a path within it, like a thread woven through a larger fabric. From this view, we don't move through time. Our experience of time unfolds as we interact with different moments along that path. This is why some physicists describe time as a dimension, not a river. The events in your life aren't vanishing behind you or waiting ahead. They already have a place in space-time. You're just becoming aware of them one by one. That leads to another possibility. Maybe it's not us moving at all. Maybe time is what's moving through our awareness. Just like scenery passing a window, moments arrive, pass through our consciousness, and then fade as the next one arrives. Our brains process one moment after another, giving the illusion of movement. So the question comes down to perspective. From inside our own experience, we feel like travelers. But from the outside, according to physics, it may be time that simply unfolds, while we stay fixed in place within a much larger, timeless structure. Can the past be changed? Once something has happened, it feels permanent. A word spoken, a glass shattered, a choice made. But the question remains, can the past ever really be changed? In ordinary life, the answer is no. The past is what already happened. It's fixed, recorded, and remembered. You can reinterpret it, reframe it, or learn from it, but you can't undo it. A missed bus stays missed. A burned cake stays burned. Time moves forward, and the past stays put. But in physics, the rules are less clear. Many of the laws that describe motion, gravity, and particles work the same whether time moves forward or backward. That symmetry suggests the universe doesn't prefer one direction. So in theory, going back in time wouldn't break the rules of the equations. That's where time travel theories come in. Some models of space-time, like wormholes or closed time-like curves, suggest it's possible to loop back to a previous point. But these ideas run into big problems. The most famous is the grandfather paradox. If you went back and changed something important, like preventing your own grandparents from meeting, it could erase your own existence, which creates a logical contradiction. To get around that, some scientists propose self-consistency rules. If time travel is possible, then events would have to unfold in a way that avoids paradoxes. You could go back, but whatever you did would end up being part of the timeline all along. Another idea is the multiverse theory, where changing the past doesn't rewrite your own timeline, but creates a new one. Still, there's no experimental evidence that the past can be changed. For now, it remains locked behind us, while only the present remains open to action. In every practical sense, the past seems set, and the arrow of time only points one way. What is a moment? A moment feels like the smallest unit of time we live through. It's when something happens, when a door closes, when a thought appears, when a word is spoken. But what exactly is a moment? In everyday life, we treat moments like dots on a timeline. One comes, then another. You might say, wait a moment, or that was a big moment. But those are just ways of describing how we experience changes over time. A moment isn't a fixed length. It could be a split-second flash or something that lingers in memory. From a physics standpoint, time is continuous. That means there aren't really moments built into the fabric of reality. Instead, time flows smoothly. We divide it into units, seconds, milliseconds, nanoseconds. But those are measurement tools, not natural breaks. Still, in quantum mechanics, some researchers have suggested time might move in discrete steps, almost like frames in a movie, though this idea remains theoretical. In neuroscience, a moment is shaped by how long it takes the brain to process events. When you hear a sound or see a flash of light, your brain takes a few milliseconds to interpret it. That window of processing becomes your now. Interestingly, what you experience as the present is always a little behind the real-time events your body reacts to. Moments are also tied to memory. If nothing stands out, a whole hour can feel like it barely happened. But if something unexpected occurs, it might be remembered as a single vivid moment, etched sharply, even if it only lasted a few seconds. So while a moment might seem simple, it sits at the intersection of physics, biology, and perception. It's not just a point in time. It's how our minds carve meaning out of the continuous flow of everything happening around us. What is truth? Truth seems like a simple idea. Something is either true or it isn't. But once you start digging into it, the question becomes more complicated than it looks. At its most basic level, truth means a statement or belief that matches reality. If someone says it's raining, and it really is, that statement is considered true. This approach, called the correspondence theory of truth, is the most common in everyday life and science. It assumes that there's an objective world out there, and our job is to describe it accurately. But truth isn't always about facts we can check. In law, for example, two people might tell very different stories about the same event. They're not necessarily lying. Each might be giving a version shaped by their own memory or perspective. That's where another view comes in, the coherence theory. According to this, something is true if it fits within a larger system of beliefs. So, in a courtroom, a testimony might be judged truthful based on how well it lines up with other evidence. Then there's a more social angle. Some philosophers argue that truth is shaped by consensus, what people agree to accept as true. This is especially common in politics or history, where the truth of an event can be interpreted differently depending on who's telling it and why. Even in science, which aims for objectivity, truths can shift. A theory that's accepted today might be updated tomorrow as new data comes in. That doesn't mean the old version was a lie, just that truth can evolve with better understanding. So while truth might start with facts, it often has to pass through filters, perspective, language, culture, and time before we call it true. And that's what makes it so complex and so important. Can we ever know anything for certain? We take a lot of things for granted. That the sun will rise tomorrow. That the ground beneath our feet is solid. That 2 + 2 is always 4. But when we ask whether we can know anything for certain, we're not talking about what's likely. We're asking about what's absolutely, unquestionably true. This is one of the oldest questions in philosophy. It's about certainty, not just belief, not just evidence, but something we can't possibly be wrong about. For example, let's say you see a tree outside your window. You believe the tree is there because you see it, but technically, your eyes could be deceiving you. Maybe you're dreaming. Maybe it's a hologram. Maybe you're in a simulation. That sounds far-fetched, but it shows how even the most obvious things aren't 100% guaranteed. Philosophers like René Descartes tried to answer this. He asked, "What's the one thing I can't doubt?" His conclusion was the fact that he was thinking. Even if he doubted everything else, he had to exist in some form to be doing the doubting. That became his starting point for certainty. In everyday life, though, we don't need absolute certainty to function. Science, for example, doesn't claim to prove things with 100% certainty. It builds models and theories that are supported by evidence and updated when new data appears. We accept this because it works. So, while perfect certainty might be rare or even impossible, we often settle for things that are reliable enough to count on. Certainty, in the strict sense, may be limited to a handful of ideas. But for most things, we operate with what's called practical certainty. Enough confidence to live, act, and make decisions, even if we can't be absolutely sure. What is knowledge? We use the word know all the time. We say we know the capital of a country, know how to ride a bike, or know that someone's lying. But what exactly counts as knowledge? At its core, knowledge is more than just having a thought or a belief. You can believe something and still be wrong. For a belief to qualify as knowledge, it usually has to meet 3 basic conditions. It has to be true, you have to believe it, and you have to have some kind of reason or evidence for believing it. Let's break that down. If someone guesses that it's going to rain tomorrow, and it does, they had a true belief. But if they were just guessing, most people wouldn't say they knew it would rain. That's because their belief wasn't based on good reasoning or evidence. Knowledge, in most cases, isn't just about getting lucky. It's about having confidence for the right reasons. Now there are different types of knowledge. There's factual knowledge, like knowing that water boils at 100 degrees Celsius. There's practical knowledge, like knowing how to drive a car. And then there's experiential knowledge, which comes from personal experience, like knowing what it feels like to be nervous before a speech. Philosophers have debated for centuries whether these kinds of knowledge are really separate or whether they overlap. Some argue that knowledge is always filtered through our senses and shaped by interpretation. Others claim there are certain truths, like in math or logic, that we can know without needing physical proof. So when we talk about knowledge, we're talking about something that feels familiar but turns out to be surprisingly complex. It's not just about collecting facts, it's about understanding what justifies those facts and why we trust them. Can two things be true at once? Yes, two things can be true at the same time, though it often depends on how you define truth. In everyday life, we already accept this without much thought. A parent might say they love their child, but also feel overwhelmed. Both of those feelings are real, even if they seem emotionally opposed. Someone might be happy with their career and still wonder if they chose the wrong path. These aren't contradictions. They're just different truths coexisting in the same person. Philosophically, truth can take several forms. There's objective truth, which refers to facts that are true regardless of opinion, like the boiling point of water. Then there's subjective truth, which deals with individual experience. Saying this soup is spicy might be true for one person and not for another. Both claims reflect real experiences, even if they don't line up. Things get more complex when you introduce perspective and context. Let's say a student finds a test difficult, while their teacher finds it easy. Is the test hard or not? Both viewpoints are valid within their own frames. The truth, in this case, isn't about the test itself, but about the relationship between the test and each person's background. There's also the question of scale. From a distance, Earth looks like a smooth sphere. Up close, it's covered in jagged mountains and deep valleys. Both descriptions are true, but they're true in different contexts. In logic, contradiction usually means one statement cancels out another. But in real life, truth is often layered. Two statements can seem to conflict, but when you step back, they may just be capturing different parts of a more complex whole. So yes, two things can be true at once, especially when you're looking at the full picture from more than one angle. Is ignorance bliss? Sometimes not knowing feels better than knowing. That's the core of the phrase, ignorance is bliss. It suggests that being unaware of something unpleasant can protect us from stress, fear, or sadness. Think of someone who doesn't know their favorite restaurant is closing. Until they find out, they get to enjoy their regular routine without any sense of loss. The bad news only becomes real once it's known. On a small scale, this idea makes intuitive sense. There are plenty of things people don't need to know to get through the day, but the real question is whether ignorance leads to happiness in the long run. In some cases, it can. If you're not aware of a distant problem you can't change, like a geopolitical crisis on the other side of the world, you might sleep better at night. But ignorance also has limits. Not knowing about a water leak in your home might delay worry, but it also delays action. Eventually, the ceiling collapses and the damage is far worse. In that case, knowledge would have allowed you to prevent a much bigger problem. This is where things get complicated. Bliss from ignorance is usually short-term. It feels good because it delays discomfort. But that delay can come with a cost. Avoiding difficult truths might spare someone pain in the moment, but it can also trap them in denial, limit their options, or keep them from making informed choices. In the end, whether ignorance feels like bliss often depends on timing, consequences, and what you're trying to avoid. Sometimes knowing hurts. but not knowing can hurt in ways you don't see coming until it's too late. Are beliefs more powerful than facts? Sometimes, what people believe can shape the world more than what's actually true. Facts are about reality. They describe things that can be tested, observed, or proven, like the boiling point of water or the distance between two cities. Beliefs, on the other hand, are mental models. They don't always need proof to feel real to someone. They're based on personal experience, culture, emotion, or upbringing. What makes beliefs powerful is that they guide behavior. If someone believes a food is poisonous, they'll avoid it, even if science says it's safe. If a group believes they're being treated unfairly, that belief alone can fuel protests or even revolutions, regardless of what the statistics say. This doesn't mean facts don't matter, but facts don't always control how people act. Beliefs do. This is especially clear in things like politics, health, and religion. A person may be shown overwhelming data, but if that information conflicts with a deeply held belief, it's often rejected. Psychologists call this confirmation bias, the tendency to favor information that supports what you already think and ignore the rest. Once a belief is emotionally charged, facts often come second. Even in everyday life, belief can shape outcomes. Think about placebos. If someone believes a sugar pill will relieve pain, the brain can actually respond as if it were real medicine. That's belief-changing biology. It doesn't mean facts have no role. It just means beliefs have a stronger grip on our actions than we might assume. So while facts describe the world, beliefs influence how we live in it. And that difference makes them incredibly powerful. Truth exists without language. Truth is often something we try to put into words, but language isn't the same thing as truth itself. At its core, truth refers to something that's accurate or real, regardless of how we describe it. For example, the sun existed long before humans had a word for sun. Its heat, its position in the sky, and its effect on the earth were all true, even when there was no one around to say so. In that sense, truth doesn't need language to exist, it just is. But here's where it gets complicated. While truth can exist on its own, understanding or sharing it usually requires language. Think of a fact like, water boils at 100 degrees Celsius. That boiling point is true no matter what we call it. But the moment we want to explain it, teach it, or argue about it, we need language to do the job. Animals, for instance, respond to truths in the world all the time without using words. A bird knows a cat is dangerous. That's a truth it acts on instinctively. But the bird can't pass that fact down in a sentence or write it in a book. That's the difference between experiencing truth and expressing it. Some philosophers argue that without language, we might still sense or perceive truths, but we'd have no way to reflect on them clearly. Language gives us the tools to define, debate, and refine what we believe to be true. So while truth might not depend on language to exist, our ability to make sense of truth and communicate it almost always does. Language doesn't create truth, but it's the bridge we use to reach it. How do we know what we know? We take in a lot every day: facts, memories, opinions, routines, and rarely stop to think about how we actually know any of it. At its core, the question, how do we know what we know, is about knowledge. And knowledge isn't just having information, it's about believing something that's actually true and having a good reason to believe it. For example, knowing that water boils at 100 degrees Celsius isn't just a guess. It's been tested, observed, and explained. That combination of belief, truth, and justification is what separates knowledge from assumption. Most of what we know comes from a few basic sources. First, there's direct experience, things we've seen, heard, or felt ourselves. You know the stove is hot because you've touched one before. Then there's testimony, what others tell us. You might know about World War II, not because you lived through it, but because you read about it or learned it in school. Another source is reasoning. Even if you've never seen the inside of a computer, you might still know it processes data just by understanding how inputs and outputs work. This is called inference, using logic to fill in what you don't directly observe. But none of these methods are perfect. Our senses can be tricked. People can lie or make mistakes. And reasoning can be flawed if it starts from a false assumption. That's why we often check things from multiple angles. Science, for example, relies on repeated testing and peer review to make sure a claim holds up. So while knowledge might feel automatic, it actually comes from a mix of observation, trust, and thought. And the more we understand where our knowledge comes from, the better we are at sorting what's reliable from what just sounds right. Is science the only path to truth? We trust science to put rockets into space, cure diseases, and explain why the sky is blue. But that leads to a deeper question. Is science the only way to discover what's true? Science is powerful because it's built on observation, testing, and repeatability. It looks for patterns in the world and uses evidence to build models that help us predict and understand reality. For example, we know water boils at 100 degrees Celsius at sea level, not because someone just said so, but because it's been tested over and over. That process gives scientific knowledge its reliability, but not everything we care about fits into a lab experiment. If someone asks what a painting means, or whether a piece of music is beautiful, science doesn't offer a formula. These kinds of truths, emotional, moral, or personal, don't rely on measurable data. They come from experience, culture, interpretation, or reflection. You don't need a microscope to know when someone's being kind or when something feels wrong. There are also philosophical truths, ideas like all humans have rights or the universe had a beginning. These aren't always proven in a lab, but they shape laws, beliefs, and even science itself. Mathematics, for example, is essential to science, but much of it exists as pure reasoning, independent of physical testing. So while science is one of the most reliable tools we have for understanding the physical world, it's not the only way people search for truth. Literature, art, ethics, and introspection explore parts of life that science might observe, but not fully explain. In the end, science helps us describe the world. Other paths help us decide what it means and what to do with it. Both matter, just in different ways. Can anything be truly understood? We spend our lives trying to understand things, how people think, how the world works, what something really means. But how far can that understanding actually go? To understand something usually means being able to explain it clearly, predict how it behaves, or relate it to something we already know. For instance, if you understand how a bicycle works, you can ride it, fix it, or describe it to someone else. That's basic functional understanding. But the moment we move beyond objects into more complex systems, things get trickier. Take the human brain. We can study neurons, map activity, even predict behavior in some cases. But does that mean we truly understand consciousness, emotion, or the experience of being alive? Not quite. There's always another layer, another unknown that pushes the limits of what we thought we understood. The same applies to relationships. You might know someone for years, know their habits and reactions, but still be surprised by how they respond in a new situation. Even with language, The words we use can't fully capture what someone else feels or means. So understanding becomes partial, situational, not absolute. In science, there's a similar issue. Even our most advanced theories are often models, approximations that work well under certain conditions, but don't cover everything. Newton's laws explain motion pretty well, until things get very fast or very small, where relativity and quantum mechanics take over. So while we can understand many things well enough to function, predict, and communicate, that understanding often has limits. It works within a context based on available knowledge and assumptions. Outside that frame, certainty breaks down. This doesn't mean we can't know anything, but it does mean that perfect, complete understanding might always be just out of reach. What is creativity? Creativity isn't just about painting or writing music. It's something we use every day, often without realizing it. Whenever we solve a problem, make a joke, or find a new way to do something routine, at its core, creativity is the ability to come up with something original that's also useful or meaningful. That might mean inventing a new product, designing a logo, or even thinking of a different way to explain a difficult topic. It's not just random imagination, there's structure to it. Creativity usually involves combining things that already exist in a new way. Take a smartphone. It wasn't created from scratch. It combined a phone, a camera, a computer, and internet access, all things that already existed. What made it creative was how those pieces were put together to meet a new kind of need. There's also a personal side to creativity. When someone writes a poem or choreographs a dance, they're expressing a mix of what they know, what they feel, and how they see the world. So creativity isn't just about the result. It's also about the process of exploring ideas and pushing beyond the obvious. Interestingly, constraints can actually help creativity. A blank page can be overwhelming, but a specific problem, like building something with only 5 pieces of wood, can spark more inventive thinking. Having limits forces people to stretch their thinking instead of falling back on what's familiar. And while some people seem naturally more creative, it's not a rare gift. Creativity can be practiced. The more we experiment, ask what if, and try new combinations, the more we train that mental muscle. It's a skill as much as it is a spark, and it shows up in far more places than just the arts. Why do we create? We build, we write, we draw, we tinker. Creation is a part of being human. From the first cave paintings to the latest software, people have always made things that didn't exist before. At a basic level, we create to solve problems. If it's too dark, we invent fire. If we need to store food, we make containers. Many creative acts start with a practical goal. But creation doesn't stop at survival. Even when basic needs are met, people still make music, tell stories, and design things just for the sake of it. So there's more to it than function. Part of the reason we create is expression. We use art, writing, and design to share ideas and feelings that are hard to explain with just facts. A painting or a song can say something that might be difficult to put into words. It's a way to connect with others, to be understood. There's also a drive for improvement. We create to make things better, faster, or more efficient. That's how technology evolves. Each new tool or invention often builds on the last one, making changes, testing limits, solving flaws. Another reason is curiosity. Sometimes people create simply to see what happens. Trying something new, even without a clear outcome, is a form of exploration. This kind of creation might not be useful at first, but it often leads to unexpected discoveries. And finally, Creation gives a sense of control. Making something is one way to leave a mark, to shape the world instead of just reacting to it. Whether it's a sketch in a notebook or a skyscraper on a skyline, creating gives people a way to influence their environment, even in small ways. What is beauty? Beauty is one of those things everyone recognizes, but no one defines exactly the same way. You might see a sunset, a painting, or a face, and just know it's beautiful. But what makes something beautiful? At its simplest, beauty is the quality of something that gives pleasure to the senses or the mind. It might be how something looks, sounds, or even feels emotionally. For instance, a song can be beautiful not because of how it looks, but because it moves you in some way. So beauty isn't just visual, it's any experience that feels deeply satisfying or harmonious. But even though people generally agree something is beautiful, the details can vary a lot. What one person sees as stunning, someone else might not notice at all. Some say beauty is in the eye of the beholder, and to a degree, that's true. Cultural background, personal taste, and even mood can all shape what someone finds beautiful. Still, certain patterns tend to show up across cultures. Symmetry in faces, balanced proportions in art, and natural landscapes are often widely appreciated. This has led some scientists and philosophers to wonder if there are biological reasons behind what we call beauty. Maybe it signals health, order, or safety. There's also a mental component. Beauty can show up in ideas too, like a mathematical proof that's surprisingly simple, or a story that wraps up in a perfect way. In these cases, it's not just about surface appearance, but about structure and meaning. Something that fits just right in our understanding of the world can feel beautiful, even if there's nothing to see or hear. So beauty isn't a single thing, it's a reaction. It's how we respond when something feels just right, whether it's a view, a sound, or an idea. Is art necessary? Art might not keep us alive in a physical sense, but it plays a much bigger role in how we live than we often realize. It's not just paintings in a gallery or music at a concert. It's anything created to express something beyond the practical. At first glance, it's easy to think of art as extra. After all, you can't eat a poem or build shelter out of a painting. But when you look at how deeply art is woven into everyday life, it becomes clear that it serves real functions, just not always in obvious ways. For example, think about how we process emotions. Art helps us do that. A sad movie gives shape to feelings that might otherwise stay stuck. A song can make someone feel understood without saying a word. This kind of expression is hard to measure, but it shapes how people relate to the world and to each other. Art also carries culture. Stories, music, architecture, they all help define who we are as a group and where we've come from. It's through art that communities preserve their identity, pass down values, and communicate things that can't be said with facts alone. And beyond emotion and culture, art drives imagination. In design, in science, in problem solving, creativity makes a difference. The leap from what exists to what could exist often starts with thinking like an artist. That doesn't mean painting a picture, but it does mean seeing the world not just as it is, but as it might be. So while art isn't about survival in the traditional sense, it plays a key role in how people make meaning, connect, and build. It's not just decoration, it's part of how humans function at a deeper level. Can something meaningless be beautiful? A splash of paint on a wall? A melody with no lyrics? A sunset that lasts only minutes and leads nowhere? These things might not do anything in a practical sense, but many people still find them beautiful. So how can something that seems meaningless still be beautiful? To start, meaning and beauty aren't always tied together. Meaning is about purpose, intention, or explanation. Beauty, on the other hand, is more about how something feels, visually, emotionally, or even mentally. When someone looks at a perfectly symmetrical snowflake or hears a soothing piece of music, they might experience a strong sense of beauty, even if the thing itself doesn't carry a deeper message or serve any clear purpose. Take abstract art as an example. Some pieces have no recognizable subject, no story, and no clear meaning, but people still respond to the color, form, and composition. The beauty comes from the experience itself, not from a message hidden inside it. Or consider nature. A thunderstorm or a spider's web can be breathtaking, even if they weren't designed for us to appreciate. They're not about anything, but they still trigger that sense of wonder or awe that we often associate with beauty. Philosophers and psychologists have noted that beauty can be a kind of instinctive reaction. Our minds are drawn to patterns, balance, contrast, and harmony, sometimes without needing a reason why. In that sense, beauty can exist independently of meaning. Of course, beauty and meaning often overlap. A powerful poem or a historic monument can be both, but one doesn't require the other. Something can be pointless in a traditional sense and still feel deeply moving or visually satisfying. In many ways, that's what makes beauty such a unique part of human experience. It doesn't always have to explain itself. Why does music move us? A few notes on a piano, a slow build of strings, and suddenly you're holding back tears, even though nothing is actually happening. Music has a strange power over us. It can stir emotions, change our mood, and even trigger physical reactions like goosebumps. But why does it work this way? At the most basic level, music is just organized sound, patterns of rhythm, pitch, and volume. But the human brain isn't passive when it hears these patterns. It actively predicts what comes next. When those predictions are met or cleverly broken, we get a small rush of pleasure. That's part of why catchy melodies and surprising chord changes feel so satisfying. But there's more going on. Music also mimics the sounds we associate with real-life emotional states. A slow, low melody might resemble a human voice expressing sadness. A fast rhythmic beat might feel energizing or joyful, like laughter or movement. These associations are built into how we interpret sound, even without words. On top of that, music taps into memory. A certain song can bring back a specific time, place, or person with surprising clarity. That's because music and memory share overlapping brain regions, particularly in areas linked to emotion. Culture also plays a role. We learn which musical structures mean sadness or tension or peace through what we hear growing up. But even across cultures, many musical responses are surprisingly universal, like lullabies being soft and slow, or victory songs being loud and rhythmic. In short, music moves us because it hits multiple systems at once. Our sense of pattern, our emotional circuits, our memories, and even our bodies. It doesn't have to say anything in words to say something that matters. And that's what makes it such a powerful part of human life. Is imagination a form of truth? When we picture something in our minds, we know it isn't real in the physical sense. But does that mean it isn't true? Imagination is often thought of as the opposite of reality. It's the space where we create stories, symbols, and possibilities that don't physically exist. But in philosophy and psychology, there's growing interest in the idea that imagination may reveal certain kinds of truth, just not in the usual factual sense. Take fiction, for example. A novel might describe events that never happened, yet still feel emotionally accurate or deeply relatable. The characters aren't real, but the experiences they reflect often are. That's one way imagination can carry truth, not by copying facts, but by expressing ideas we recognize as meaningful or valid. In science and math, imagination also plays a role. Before we build a machine or prove a theorem, we often imagine how things could work. The process of discovery starts with a mental model, an imaginative guess about how reality is structured. So even in the most fact-based fields, imagination is often the first step toward truth. Imagination also allows us to test alternatives. By picturing different outcomes, we can explore moral decisions, emotional reactions, or complex problems without acting them out. This helps us navigate the real world more wisely. In that sense, imagination isn't false. It's hypothetical. It gives us a kind of sandbox to explore things that may not be true now, but could be, or should be, or once were. It opens a space for emotional, moral, and even creative truths that don't rely on strict evidence, but still matter. So while imagination might not always tell us what is, it can help us understand what could be true, and sometimes what we already believe to be true on a deeper level. Do ideas have lives of their own? When we picture something in our minds, we know it isn't real in the physical sense. But does that mean it isn't true? Imagination is often thought of as the opposite of reality. It's the space where we create stories, symbols, and possibilities that don't physically exist. But in philosophy and psychology, there's growing interest in the idea that imagination may reveal certain kinds of truth, just not in the usual factual sense. Take fiction, for example. A novel might describe events that never happened, yet still feel emotionally accurate or deeply relatable. The characters aren't real, but the experiences they reflect often are. That's one way imagination can carry truth, not by copying facts, but by expressing ideas we recognize as meaningful or valid. In science and math, imagination also plays a role. Before we build a machine or prove a theorem, we often imagine how things could work. The process of discovery starts with a mental model, an imaginative guess about how reality is structured. So even in the most fact-based fields, imagination is often the first step toward truth. Imagination also allows us to test alternatives. By picturing different outcomes, we can explore moral decisions, emotional reactions, or complex problems without acting them out. This helps us navigate the real world more wisely. In that sense, imagination isn't false, it's hypothetical. It gives us a kind of sandbox to explore things that may not be true now, but could be, or should be, or once were. It opens a space for emotional, moral, and even creative truths that don't rely on strict evidence, but still matter. So while imagination might not always tell us what is, it can help us understand what could be true, and sometimes what we already believe to be true on a deeper level. Is beauty universal or cultural? Some things just seem beautiful the moment we see them. A sunset, a baby's smile, a perfectly symmetrical face. But is that reaction hardwired into us? Or is it shaped by the world we live in? The idea that beauty is universal suggests there are patterns or features we all tend to find attractive, no matter where we're from. Studies have shown that people across different cultures often rate symmetrical faces or natural landscapes as beautiful. This might be because our brains are drawn to balance, or because certain traits signal health and safety on a deep biological level. But then there's the cultural side. What's considered fashionable, elegant, or desirable can vary widely from place to place and change over time. In some cultures, pale skin has been prized. In others, darker skin has been the ideal. In certain times, curvy bodies were symbols of wealth. Later, thinness became a sign of discipline. These preferences often reflect the values, norms, and resources of a particular society. Even in art and design, what counts as beautiful is shaped by culture. A song or painting that moves one person might seem strange or even unpleasant to someone from a different background. This doesn't mean beauty is fake. It just shows that context matters. So the answer may be both. Some reactions to beauty could be part of human nature, shared across cultures. But much of what we think is beautiful depends on where we grow up, what we're taught, and what we learn to notice. Beauty isn't just a fixed trait out in the world. It's a mix of perception, biology, and influence, shaped by both what we are and where we come from. Can the act of creation be sacred? Building something from nothing can feel different from anything else we do. Whether it's writing a song, painting a picture, or cooking a homemade meal, the act of creating often carries a strange sense of weight, like it matters more than just the final result. The idea that creation can be sacred doesn't have to mean religious. In this context, sacred simply means deeply meaningful, set apart from the ordinary, or treated with reverence. Across history and cultures, the act of making something, especially something expressive, has often been seen as more than just a practical task. In many traditions, art and creativity were closely tied to spiritual life. Temples weren't just places of worship. They were feats of architecture and sculpture. Music was used not just for entertainment, but to connect with the divine. Even today, some people treat their creative work with rituals or intentional focus, lighting a candle before writing, cleaning a workspace before drawing, not because it's required, but because it gives the process a kind of quiet respect. This idea also applies beyond traditional art. A teacher designing a lesson, a parent crafting a family tradition, or a coder building an app can all treat their work with the same intention. The sacredness comes less from what is being made and more from how and why it's being made. When creation is thoughtful, personal, and purposeful, it can carry a sense of value that feels bigger than the thing itself. That's where the idea of the sacred comes in, not as a religious label, but as a way to recognize the depth of certain human experiences. The act of creation, for many, isn't just about producing a thing. It's about participating in something that feels real, meaningful, and uniquely human. What is freedom? Freedom is often described as the ability to do what you want, when you want. But the idea goes deeper than that and gets more complicated the more we think about it. At its core, freedom usually refers to the absence of restrictions. You're free when no one is forcing you, limiting you, or controlling your choices. This is sometimes called negative freedom, freedom from interference. For example, being able to speak your mind without censorship, or move freely without being detained. But there's also another version, known as positive freedom. That's the freedom to actually pursue what matters to you. It's not just about having options, it's about having the ability to make use of them. You might technically be free to become a doctor, but without access to education, that freedom isn't very useful. So positive freedom is about having the tools, knowledge, or resources to act on your choices. There's also the question of internal freedom. Even when no one's stopping you, you might be held back by fear, addiction, or self-doubt. In that case, the barrier isn't outside, it's inside. Some thinkers argue that true freedom means understanding yourself well enough to make decisions you actually stand behind. Then there's the balance between individual freedom and living with others. Total freedom can't exist in a society without limits. One person's freedom might interfere with another's, so we end up trading a little personal freedom for shared rules, safety, or fairness. So freedom isn't one simple thing. It's a balance of independence, ability, self-awareness, and cooperation. And depending on how you define it, freedom can be something you either already have or something you're still working toward. What is sanity? Sanity is one of those words we hear all the time, but rarely stop to unpack. At a basic level, it's the idea of having a mind that works in a way society considers normal, rational, stable, and grounded in reality. When someone is described as sane, it usually means they can think clearly, control their behavior, and distinguish what's real from what isn't. In everyday life, that includes things like remembering your schedule, reacting appropriately to a situation, and making choices that match the world around you. If someone becomes unable to do those things, especially over a long period, they might be described as losing touch with reality or becoming insane. But sanity isn't just a medical term, it's also a social one. What counts as sane behavior can depend on the time, place, and culture you're in. For instance, talking to yourself out loud might seem strange in some settings, but totally normal in others, like rehearsing a presentation or working through a problem. Psychologists tend to avoid the word sanity because it's vague. Instead, they talk about mental health, diagnoses, and specific symptoms. For example, someone with schizophrenia might experience hallucinations, but with treatment, they can often manage their condition and live a stable, functional life. There's also a philosophical layer. Some thinkers argue that sanity isn't just about fitting in, but about staying internally consistent, having a set of thoughts, beliefs, and behaviors that align with each other. Even in extreme or unusual situations, a person might still be considered sane if their thinking is coherent and self-aware. So while the word sanity feels straightforward, it's actually a mix of biology, behavior, social norms, and logic, all wrapped into a single label. Why do we dream? Every night, when we fall asleep, our brains don't just shut off. They start running a completely different kind of show. And dreams are one of the most mysterious parts of that process. At the simplest level, dreaming happens during a stage of sleep called REM, or rapid eye movement. That's when brain activity becomes more intense, closer to how it looks when we're awake. During this stage, people experience vivid images, stories, and emotions that we call dreams. But why does this happen? One major theory is that dreams help us process information. Throughout the day, we take in a massive amount of sensory input: faces, conversations, problems, worries, and the brain needs a way to organize it all. Dreams might be a byproduct of that sorting process. As the brain strengthens important connections and clears out the less useful ones, strange combinations of memories and emotions can show up in dream form. Another idea is that dreams let us simulate situations. Just like a flight simulator helps a pilot practice, dreaming might help us rehearse how to handle danger, conflict, or complex social situations. Even if the scenarios are bizarre, the emotional rehearsal might still be valuable. Some researchers also believe dreaming helps regulate our mood. If you've ever had a stressful day and then woken up feeling a bit more balanced, it might be thanks to the emotional processing that happened in your sleep. There's no single answer that fully explains dreams, and they likely serve multiple purposes at once. What's clear is that dreaming isn't just random noise. It's a built-in part of how the brain works. Messy, strange, and still not fully understood, but deeply tied to memory, emotion, and learning. What is hope? Hope is what keeps people going when things are uncertain, difficult, or completely out of their control. It's the belief, not a guarantee, that something better could still happen, even when there's no evidence yet. At its core, hope is an emotional and cognitive response to uncertainty. When we hope for something, we imagine a possible future outcome that is positive or desirable. That imagined future may not be guaranteed or even likely, but the very act of thinking it's still possible gives us a kind of mental momentum. It helps us persist, wait, or prepare, even when the odds aren't in our favor. Unlike blind optimism, hope doesn't ignore challenges. It usually emerges when a person is aware that things could go wrong, but chooses to focus on the possibility that they might not. For example, someone waiting for medical results might feel anxious and realistic about the risks, but still hope for good news. That mental posture doesn't erase the fear, but it gives them something to hold on to. Psychologists often link hope to motivation and problem solving. People who feel hopeful tend to set more goals, try new strategies, and recover better from setbacks. It's not just a feeling, it shapes behavior. A student who hopes to pass an exam is more likely to study, not because they're guaranteed to succeed, but because they believe success is still on the table. There's also a social side to hope. Communities often rely on shared hope during hard times, like after a natural disaster or in the face of injustice. Hope becomes a common thread that encourages people to rebuild, resist, or simply carry on. In short, hope is not about certainty. It's about possibility, and our minds are built to keep reaching for that possibility, even in the dark. Are we progressing as a species? Humanity today lives longer, travels farther, and knows more about the universe than at any point in history. But whether that counts as real progress depends on how we define it. Progress usually means improvement. In terms of technology, medicine, and communication, the evidence is clear. We've gone from handwritten letters to instant global video calls. Diseases that once wiped out millions are now treatable or preventable. Literacy rates are up, extreme poverty is down, and average life expectancy has steadily climbed in many parts of the world. But not all change is automatically good. The same technologies that make life easier can also cause new problems. Climate change, driven largely by industrial development, threatens ecosystems and global stability. Social media connects billions, but also spreads misinformation and shapes behavior in unpredictable ways. Progress in one area often creates new challenges in another. Then there's the question of moral or social progress. Have we become kinder, more just? In some ways, yes. Slavery is outlawed in most countries. More people have legal rights and protections than ever before. But injustice, inequality, and violence still exist, sometimes in more subtle or complex forms. Progress isn't a straight line. It can slow down, reverse, or happen unevenly. One region might experience rapid improvements, while another struggles. What's seen as progress for one group might be harmful to another. So when we talk about progressing as a species, we're talking about more than just gadgets or knowledge. It's about whether we're becoming better at meeting human needs, physical, emotional, and social, on a wide scale. And measuring that isn't always easy. Some changes are obvious in data. Others are harder to quantify, but still shape how we live, interact, and understand what it means to move forward. What is peace? Peace is often described as the absence of conflict, but it's more than just the end of fighting. It's a condition where people feel safe, stable, and able to go about their lives without fear or disruption. At the most basic level, peace can mean no war or violence. A country not in a state of armed conflict is considered to be at peace. But peace can also refer to something more personal and internal, like a calm state of mind, or a household without constant tension. In society, peace is built through systems that reduce the likelihood of violence. This includes things like fair laws, equal rights, functioning institutions, and open dialogue. If people trust that disputes can be settled through rules and not force, the chances of peace lasting go up. But keeping peace is different from making it. After a conflict ends, people often have to rebuild trust, infrastructure, and a shared sense of belonging. That's where concepts like reconciliation and justice come in. Peace that's only maintained by fear or force tends to be fragile. On the other hand, peace built on fairness and mutual respect is usually more stable. There's also the idea of positive peace, which goes beyond avoiding violence. It includes conditions like access to education, healthcare, and economic opportunity, things that reduce the chances of future unrest. Without these, even if people aren't fighting, tensions can quietly build. So peace isn't just the silence after a storm. It's the ongoing work of creating environments where people can thrive without harming each other. Whether in a neighborhood, a country, or between nations, peace depends on more than just stopping conflict. It requires effort, structure, and a shared commitment to something better. What does it mean to be human? Being human means more than just having a certain kind of body or brain. It's a mix of physical traits, emotional depth, and the ability to think in complex ways. At the most basic level, humans are a species of primates with advanced brains. We walk upright, use tools, develop language, and build cultures. But what makes us human isn't just biology. It's what we do with it. We think about the future. We reflect on the past. We create stories, art, and music. We form relationships that go beyond survival. Humans have the ability to imagine things that don't yet exist, and then work together to make them real. Whether it's a bridge, a smartphone, or a shared belief system, these are all part of human activity. Being human also means experiencing a wide range of emotions: joy, fear, curiosity, guilt, compassion. These feelings shape how we interact with each other and the world around us. We don't just react to the environment, we assign meaning to it. A sunset isn't just light scattering. It can be beautiful, sad, or inspiring, depending on how we interpret it. Social connection plays a big role too. Humans are deeply influenced by those around them. We build families, communities, and systems of cooperation. We pass down knowledge and values. Even in disagreement, we seek shared understanding. At the same time, to be human is to be flawed. We make mistakes. We struggle with our own limits, but we also adapt, learn, and try again. It's this combination, thinking, feeling, creating, and connecting, that defines the human experience. It's not just about what we are, it's about what we keep trying to become. Can we ever truly change? Change is something we often aim for: new habits, better decisions, a fresh start. But underneath that effort is a deeper question. Is real, lasting change actually possible? At a surface level, people change all the time. A person can quit smoking, start exercising, learn a new skill, or shift careers. These changes are easy to notice, and they often feel significant. But they tend to focus on behavior, what we do. The tougher question is about inner change. Can we change our personality, our worldview, the way we respond to stress or failure? That's where things get more complicated. Psychologists often talk about traits and patterns. Some parts of our temperament, like how outgoing we are or how emotionally reactive we tend to be, are relatively stable over time. They're shaped by both genetics and early experiences. But that doesn't mean we're locked in. People can gradually adjust how they think and feel, especially when they're motivated, supported, and consistent. What helps is awareness. Recognizing a thought pattern, like always assuming the worst, is the first step towards shifting it. Over time, with practice and feedback, that pattern can be replaced with something more balanced. It won't feel automatic at first, but the brain is surprisingly flexible. There are limits, of course. We might not become entirely different people, but that's not really the point. Change doesn't mean becoming someone else. It means evolving how we show up, how we handle challenges, how we relate to others, how we grow through experiences. So while the core of who we are might remain steady, the way we live that out can shift in meaningful ways. True change is possible. It's just more gradual, layered, and effortful than most quick-fix promises suggest. Is the universe conscious? Consciousness is something we usually associate with brains, specifically with humans and maybe some animals. But there's a bigger, stranger question that's been debated for centuries. Could the entire universe itself be conscious? At first, it sounds like science fiction. After all, the universe is made up of stars, gas, planets, and empty space. It doesn't seem like something that could be aware or have thoughts. But this idea isn't just a fantasy. It comes from real attempts to understand what consciousness actually is. One version of this theory is called panpsychism. It suggests that consciousness might be a basic property of the universe, kind of like gravity or mass. Not that everything thinks, but that even the smallest particles might have some primitive form of awareness. Combine enough of them in the right way, like in a brain, and you get the rich, complex experience we call consciousness. Another angle comes from physics. Some researchers have pointed out that consciousness doesn't fit neatly into our current models of how the universe works. It's hard to explain how physical processes create a subjective experience. That puzzle has led a few scientists to wonder if consciousness isn't just something that emerged in us, but something the universe already had, in some form, from the beginning. Of course, there's no solid evidence that the universe is conscious. These ideas are still speculative, and most scientists stick with the view that consciousness is produced by complex biological systems like the brain. But the fact that serious thinkers are even considering this possibility shows how mysterious consciousness really is. Whether or not the universe is aware of itself, the question challenges the way we think about mind, matter, and what it means to be conscious at all. What question should we ask next? The questions we ask shape the answers we find. And sometimes the real challenge isn't solving a problem, it's figuring out what problem to focus on in the first place. Asking, what question should we ask next, is really about direction. It's a way of stepping back and deciding which path is worth exploring before taking the next step. This happens in science, philosophy, policy making, and even everyday life. For example, before trying to fix traffic in a city, it helps to ask whether the goal is faster travel, cleaner air, or fewer cars altogether. The way we frame the issue leads to completely different solutions. In philosophy, this kind of thinking appears when a question feels stuck. When people debated what makes a government just, thinkers eventually realized they first had to ask what justice even means. In science, researchers often face dead ends until someone shifts the focus. Instead of just asking what matter is made of, physicists began asking what rules govern how it behaves. And that led to quantum theory. This type of question isn't about curiosity for its own sake. It's strategic. It asks, where should we aim our curiosity next? It's a tool used in research labs, design studios, and startup meetings. What do we not know yet? What are we assuming? What might we be missing? Being able to identify the right next question is often what separates progress from stagnation. It means noticing when the current line of thought is limited and being able to reframe the issue entirely.